I met Elaine at the rim of a fountain. The water bellowed from the spigot in its ornate pattern. The fact it was running at all was a miracle for our underfunded university. It was just after my 8:45 class on early horror films. No better way to start your morning than with a dissection of the infernal cauldron, I suppose. She sat on the edge of the courtyard fountain with her head buried in a textbook, a fresh brewed coffee from the commissary by her hip. Her hair draped to her collarbone and swayed in the passing breeze. I assumed she was a nursing major by the art on the front of her textbooks, and the fact that she was always trapped in their pages. I assumed she had a keen mind, top of her class even by the way she was constantly scribbling on her notepaper. I assumed she had a boyfriend waiting for her back home, but I was tired of assuming. Perhaps it was the way the sun peeked over the clouds, or the water playing the perfect score in the background, or it may have just been the pressure of summer vacation's approach. Whatever it was, on that morning of May 27th, the frame was absolute perfection. So I took the shot. I sat next to her and made some comment about the book she was reading that I couldn't possibly remember. She laughed at it though. Out of nervousness or pity, she would never tell, but the laugh offered all the confidence I needed. We left that morning with a date planned, and then that date with another, and another, and another. She said yes 6 years later to the day. We took a trip to the largest resort in our state. We made sure the sky was clear, the crowds were minimal, and the flowers had bloomed. I got off my knees to embrace her. She was elated. Her smile, her embrace, her scent, every detail was just as I imagined. I managed to discover another frame as flawless as the day I met her. From there, we made a beautiful film of our life together. She was a nurse at the leading hospital in the area. The hours were grueling, but she felt rewarded by the lives she touched. I, while not making it in Hollywood, got contract videography work for advertisements and weddings that kept me busy enough. Then, 2 years after our wedding day, I opened her present to me on our anniversary. In the box was a stick with 2 bold red lines, and the film of our life was made entirely of perfect frames. Then the baby was born. The harsh light from the hospital room nearly melted the creases of my wife's face away. Her breath was rapid, having just expelled the baby from within her. Eons passed as we waited for the cry. The buzz of fluorescent light bulbs overhead rattled the room, the indistinguishable scent of sterilization masked with the scent of birth like a fishing net. The cry was not as expected. It was merely a hic, a gasp, and choking. I caught a glimpse of the baby before the nurses rushed him out of the room. His spine bent as if a string yanked the back of his head to his heels. His torso was a stump compared to the ski pole limbs attached, and the eyes, bulging from his skull, they clung to their sockets like balloons inflated in a roll of duct tape. The doctor said they had never seen a disorder like this before. Months of ultrasounds and blood work showing a healthy boy, only for this to be the result. It was as if he was mutilated during labor. Elaine and I were not the same. We talked less and less as every breath now needed to be spent on keeping it alive a little longer. The baby continued to breathe and feed, although through a tube. She loved the baby. She devoted everything she had to it, and I was in disbelief. I hoped to wake up from the nightmare that became of us. That the pregnancy doctors we talked to were right, and a healthy baby was still on the way. Elaine didn't return to the hospital for work, even after the maternity leave expired. I stopped taking contracts for video work for a year. The offers completely dried up in that time. That was until I received an email with the to-the-point header, documentary request. Documentary work had always been an interest of mine. Since weddings and advertisements are mostly shot at the mercy of the client, I was more than interested in being the driver for a project.
We are an independent church based an hour from Pleasant View, West Virginia. Our festival is coming in a few days, and as this is a once-in-a-lifetime event, we would love to preserve it. All we ask for is 3 nights of your time, and we will make you feel right at home. If you're interested, we can discuss prices and directions. Money is no issue. We believe our faith will be of particular interest to you, Mr. Dowie. May you have faith. Pastor Madison.
I was turned away after reading the email. Why would it be of particular interest to me? Beyond the odd ending to the email, I was never partial to religion. Given recent events, my partiality grew far worse than ever. The longer I sat with the email, the more disgusted I would be with myself if I accepted such an offer. Weeks passed since the initial email from Pastor Madison. I applied to over 50 jobs in that week for consistent income. Of the near 50 job postings I applied to, I only heard back from 4, all with essentially the same apologetic rejection. Elaine's time was wholly dedicated to the baby. She was at its beck and whim. With each gasp or choke, she was there to refill the baby's feeding tube or change the diaper. She was monopolized while I could hardly look at it. I was disgusted with myself for feeling this way. It was a constant stab of guilt within me. Funds ran completely dry. We began putting every expense on credit cards. In doing so, we dug a hole $3,000 deep in only a couple of months. We feared losing the home. We feared losing the baby. We feared everything, and still rejection after rejection came from job listings with my name in the letterhead. I delivered food after a period of time, but every check was like filling a canyon with a bucket of sand. Then another email came. Not to me this time, but to Elaine. She showed me the message that read as follows.
I hope I find you well. I wanted to follow up regarding a previous email. We are willing to pay you $8,000 for your services. We are very intrigued by your previous work and hope you will consider working with us for a few days. Our offer is negotiable. If you are interested, I can send you the directions to our church. The festival is quickly approaching. We would love to hear from you soon. May you have faith. Pastor Madison.
I felt my integrity deteriorate as I read through the email. $8,000 for 3 days sounded too good to be an actual offer. Options were slim at the time, however, and 3 days away would be a much-needed break from life, even if it was spent hearing this pastor proselytize. Perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime festival could even be fun. I told Elaine that I would take the offer. It was the first time I had seen her with an authentic smile since the baby was born. I decided her smiles were worth selling out for a church for the next couple of days. I opened my laptop and emailed Pastor Madison back for the directions. 3 days until the festival. Pleasant View was only a 2-hour drive from my home. As instructed by Pastor Madison, I pulled onto a black road that devolved from pavement to gravel and then dirt. The dirt ended in an encircling tree line only 10 minutes from the main road. The remaining 50-minute journey needed to be completed on foot. Not a simple hike with all the film gear I was lugging. I took my phone from my pocket and sent a text to Elaine, notifying her of my arrival. The 1 bar of signal I was sure would be the last for the next 3 days. After briefly worrying about leaving my car, I submerged myself into the sprawling woods. An hour later, I emerged from the bramble and leaf-coated forest to an open passing. Buildings speckled the grass with what seemed to be little forethought. Huts would be a generous term for such structures. Stacked logs platted together by dried clay formed the exterior walls, each one uniquely assembled but collectively shared in their state of decay. The only buildings large enough to fit more than 3 people in them were a structure in the middle of a 1-acre fenced-in field, and a church nestled in the village center. The top of the spire was a vacant seat for a cross. I considered getting a shot of the village to prove this wasn't just a film set I stumbled onto when a figure approached. The man wore a crisp white alb ordained with a Jerusalem cross stitched with golden fabric. A wine-red sash draped around his neck embroidered with the same golden stitching. He appeared to glide across the dirt path. Each of his steps were careful and deliberate. The man kept pure black hair tight to his scalp. No evidence of hair remained below his eyebrows. Gray didn't dare show regardless of the wrinkles appearing at the corners of his eyes. His irises cloaked his pupils perfectly. Pastor Madison, I assume, I said, extending my hand.
We appreciate your time, Mr. Dowie.
His voice was smooth, as if the world's troubles were just set at ease. His hand was soft and light as it shook mine. His presence was strangely inoffensive, like it was constructed to never be disliked by any stranger.
Please take this.
He extended an envelope. Upon opening it, I found a check for $4,000. The other half I was sure would come after the festival. It seemed rude in that moment to confirm. He had a nature that was difficult to question, so I thanked him for the early payment and put it into my wallet. The picture of me and my wife met my eyes from the billfold. Our smiles are carved onto our faces. I remember the intense labor it took to wear a smile that day. We peeked over the vast white nothing, introduced to the image by a crease of my own making nearly a year prior. I felt a stab in my gut each time I saw the image. The crease did not prevent the stab, but the crease remained.
Allow me to show you around our town before your first service.
I felt as though there wasn't much I couldn't see from our current position, but I obliged. As we walked toward the heart of the village, he directed my attention to each of the structures, giving a story of each of the families who lived there. He spoke glowingly of each family and named each member. He pointed my attention to the creek where they washed their garments, the open field where the children all played, and the rickety well that dried into nothing more than a safety hazard, to be avoided at all times. But I could barely hear his hypnotically mundane voice as my attention was drawn to the fenced-in field. A group of women knelt by one of the standing cattle. They rubbed and kissed the animal's belly as they sang. I thought to ask the pastor about the strange display, but decided it would be best to hold my tongue. His nature still difficult to question. He spoke instead.
The sun is almost down. It is time for our service.
A smorgasbord of color, fueled by the full moon painted window frame, shapes around the room. Candles shifted the shadows in a mesmerizing sway. Pastor Madison prepared to deliver his sermon to the village residents, filling the 30 pew seats. Audio levels were as perfect as could be hoped in the open nave. The rustles and mumbles of the congregation ceased when Pastor Madison stepped forward to begin.
Let there be a time for each of us, a time beyond the trials of today that we may find all things.
Upon rechecking the viewfinder, there was a little too much headroom above the pastor. I made the proper adjustment to satisfaction.
We can rip away the flaws and failures manifest in our current form through faith in the truth revealed to us.
The lighting in the church was causing the temperature to run a little too warm for my liking. I quickly dove into the camera settings and adjusted the white balance using Pastor Madison's robe as a reference. I winced at the mistake. A failure due to lack of practice, I assured myself.
Give him your faith so that we may yet again purge the world of its wrongdoings.
A door behind the pastor creaks open and the congregation stands in a roaring applause, blocking both the camera and my own view of the pulpit. I could only find slim sightlines between the shoulders of the congregation and their flurry of clapping hands. I slammed the tripod together and moved to the aisle for a clear view of the pulpit once more. What stood there was incomprehensible. It appeared to be the shape of a human. I could only see the outline of arms, legs, and a head, but it shifted. It was as if the thing had to actively work to contain itself to that form. The features of the being melted and folded in on itself. Its skin was charcoal black, with specks of pale that gave it the appearance of snow falling on a tinted window. The camera could not see it. Where the thing should be in the frame only showed as a white smudge that dimmed the rest of the light in the image. The aisle door creaked open just a foot behind me.
Behold! The manifestation of death!
A woman entered with dirt staining the lower portion of her dress. She held something in her arms, a small creature shielded by her shoulder. An all too familiar hic and gasp and choking wafted from the creature. It was a calf with a bend in the spine, a slumpy torso, and the eyes. The eyes clung to their sockets with the same desperation as the baby's. The woman ushered the calf to the altar and got on a knee before presenting it to the being. Pastor Madison and the congregation muttered in a language unfamiliar to me. Their words were rapid and grew louder as the being took the calf in what could only be perceived as its hands. A woman started to howl and convulse where she stood, and the chants overwhelmed her. The being raised the calf into the air, unhinged what could only be interpreted as its jaw, and consumed the deformed calf. The chanting ended in a breath. Silent anticipation washed over every person in the room. My ribs could hardly contain my heart. After months of researching and doctor visits, I finally found another creature with the same affliction as my son, and it's gone. I wanted to scream, wanted to attack the thing that just ate my only chance at understanding what my baby has. I withheld this instinct. Pastor Madison bent behind the being and shouted,
"It is born anew by pure faith!"
The crowd erupted into cheers and prayers in the unknown language. Tears filled the eyes of the congregation as Pastor Madison lifted the calf above his head, now perfectly healthy. The service ended in an instant. The congregation emptied past me, and the being slipped into the back room, leaving only Pastor Madison and I in the nave. He recognized my confusion and, with a wave, invited me to the back room. Rationally, I assumed that this was all some sick prank at my expense, that they had to have known about my son's affliction and made some kind of puppet to mimic the deformities. It seemed far too real to be a puppet, but it had to be something. Once Pastor Madison went into the back room, I felt the very real possibility of being in the same room as that thing. All I knew was that on the other side of the door, there were answers. The only answers in the world as far as I knew. So I took a breath and went in. The door squealed in a way I hadn't noticed from the back of the church. The tan stucco walls couldn't have been more than 10 feet in either direction. There was enough room for a polished wooden desk with hand-carved iconography of departed saints, a purple and green love seat that appeared more suited for a hotel in the 80s than an office of a pastor, and a pocket Bible resting on an end table. Pastor Madison sat behind the desk with his forehead in his palms. He alerted himself to my presence and extended an invite to the love seat with a heaven-facing palm.
"He's never here by the time I come in,"
Pastor Madison said. He must have been savvy to my wariness. The ease his statement granted me broke the dam of questions as I spewed every thought I had. What was wrong with the calf? How was it cursed? Was any of this real? What was that thing? He sat in silence with my barrage of questions. His inoffensive face remained stoic as they bounced around his head, until he spoke.
"That was my son's Bible before he passed. I used to have 3 others like it filled with notes, cover to cover."
I found this an odd statement, given the myriad of questions I gave him. I took the pocket Bible in my hand without turning the cover.
"You're holding the last Bible in this village. Open it."
After a brief wave of confusion, I flipped open the cover. I thumbed through the pages, each one with an X etched into it with pencil. Each page I progressed, the duller the lead, and more rips in the page from the pressure, until there were only rips in each page.
The answers I needed weren't in there. Nothing about a boy's soul in need of a new body. Like your son.
The words stunned me. So he did know about my son. But how? We have never posted online about him since his birth. I knew no one from this part of the state, and had no reason to pass through a town an hour from civilization, but ultimately he wasn't wrong. This place offered the only chance my son had at a long, fulfilling life. Without any other possible explanation for such a spectacle, I believed it. I had faith. A long pause followed, broken by his voice.
"Let me show you where you'll be staying."
The sun descended behind the skyline hours ago at this point. I knew my stay would likely not be a comfortable one. In such an impoverished rural community, each roof is only suited for the families within. Honestly, they were probably a few rooms short of suited. I followed the pastor to my living quarters without a word being spoken. I followed him past the rickety fence, the dilapidated well that erupted a musty odor, and into the second largest building in the village, the barn. We entered the hayloft, a spacious room in all dimensions but height, as the ceiling nearly grazed my scalp. Hay bales lining the baseboard and stacking to the low ceiling in areas, an iron-framed bed sat below a broken window, paired with a bucket to its side. The windowsill was splattered in red. Pastor Madison apologized for the state of the room and mentioned the likelihood of hearing some noises in the night.
"It'll likely be mice. It's best to ignore them,"
he said in a stern voice. I assured him it was no issue at all. I wasn't going to be staying long anyways. Then he left in a hurry. The moonlight gave the hayloft a hint of sickly pale white. Hours passed since entering the hayloft before I found an ounce of comfort, and still the springs of the mattress would not relent. I rolled to my opposite side, jab. I stretched out onto my back, jab. I yawned. Thud. I sat up in an instant. The moon's light poorly painted the room, leaving vast corners in pure darkness. I called out to the void with quivering teeth. No response. Peeking just beyond the corner of the shadows was a trail of once stacked hay bales. My mind went to the being at the church service. If this place held such mysteries as that being, what else could be lurking here? Anger grew from desperation, and I hurled the bucket into the darkness. The clang of the bucket meeting the floorboards forced a high-pitched shriek out of the darkness. A figure darted for the door and shot down the stairs, stomping on each step as it descended. Without thought, I followed. The field and the village beyond was motionless. I desperately scanned the area for who or what that thing was watching me sleep. I walked around the barn, ignoring the few cattle that chose to sleep under the stars for the night. They were undisturbed, which gave me relief. That is, until I saw it. A figure no more than 50 yards hunched down in the grass. I could make out the back of the head and shoulders. Even at its imagined full height, it seemed small. I approached it cautiously. Each step I took was mindful of my feet, careful not to catch a twig or dry leaf under my weight. I still was not quiet enough. It jolted up and turned to face me. It was a girl, no older than 10. Her body was frail and her brown hair matted to her head. Her eyes swelled with panic at the sight of me. She was unusual, even beyond her objective neglect. Her upper lip weaved into an M shape up to the outer corner of each of her nostrils. Her hand slapped over her mouth, covering the blemish in embarrassment. She drops the basket woven of hay into the grass. I could hear her breath through her chest as I stepped closer. She retreated, keeping a constant distance between us. Tears formed in her eye and reflected in the moonlight. Not knowing sign language, I crossed my arms over my heart as I asked her to trust me. I approached her slowly, her breath faster with each step. I bent over to her hay basket. 3 wine berries scattered from within it. I gathered them back in and handed it to her. She uncovered her grin and recovered slightly with a sniff and a wipe of her eyes. She looked at me and smiled when I asked if she wanted help picking her berries. I smiled when she nodded yes. We spent the next few hours gathering berries into her basket. When we split up, I would gather a palmful, go to her, and dump them into her basket. She came alive a little more with each berry we collected. When the light of the sun became noticeable on the face of the hills, fear hit her once again. I thought of my son. Should he live long enough to be aware of himself, would he fear the sun too? I paused at her side, after dumping a palm of berries. After a moment of thought, I looked into her eyes and told her what I saw the night before, about the sick calf who was cured in the church, about the being that cured it, and that she could have a body that matched the beauty of her soul. I hoped she would be elated to hear the news, that she would be excited to go to the church with me that evening and be cured, but she concealed her mouth with her palm once again and ran for the barn, her eyes once more filled with tears. 2 days until the festival. The sun filled the hayloft with fury. The previous night felt so far away, but after confirming on my phone, it was only 2 hours ago. The bed protested as I staggered to my feet. My mind immediately went to the girl. I hated referring to her as the girl, but it hadn't occurred to me to ask her name. The floorboards cracked and popped as I approached the stairs. My mouth opened to call her, but ultimately, the air was best if left silent. I descended the stairs with my camera equipment alone. The morning light intensified to midday after shooting B-roll of the church, barn, and a couple other residential buildings. As the day aged, I got some shots of the village residents. A wife rinsed the family laundry in the creek and pinned them to the clothesline. Her right leg, just a few inches shy of her left, gave her a distinct limp, assisted by a twisted wooden cane. A husband with a hunch that curled his shoulders inward posted against his doorframe as he popped smoke into the air from his pipe. A group of 5 kids in a backyard playing sword fight with sticks scavenged from the tree line, each with their own blemish. A burn, a scar, a lazy eye, a missing hand, and the last with Down syndrome. Each person I approached seemed to have some abnormality, and each one recoiled from the camera once they were aware of its presence. I returned to the barn in the evening, just before the sky shed its blue. As I climbed the stairs, I heard a scurry of feet from the hayloft. When I entered the room, it seemed unchanged, the bucket still resting at the end of its violent journey across the room. The hay bales remained spilled from the top of the stack, and the girl concealed in her usual hiding place. The only difference from that morning were the berries, a group of berries baked at the ledge of a shattered window. I took a step or two towards the berries and was met with a hiss behind me. I turned and caught a glimpse of the girl before she ducked back behind the hay bales. I assumed it was meant to be a shush that her lips would not allow. I snuck behind the hay bale with her. She was tucked into a ball with her mouth concealed by her knees. I tried to console her with a touch, but she dodged my hand with a jolt. I whispered my apologies to her, which was met with another hiss, the first time her eyes met mine since the night prior. A pause opened a chasm between us. A faint gust of wind blew into the room from the broken window. The sound whistled past the shards of glass that still held onto the frame and brushed the loose straw against the door. The sound was enough to pique the girl's interest. She darted her head around the bales of hay for a glance at her berries. She remained unchanged. She paused at this realization before retreating behind her knees once more. I offered an apology for offending her and that my intention was not to hurt her feelings at all. She offered nothing in response. After a moment of consideration, I fished in my pocket and revealed my wallet. Flipping open the fold, I removed my family portrait from its plastic sheath. The crease held firm by the pressure of time. With pins in my lungs, I flipped the white corner to reveal my son. His form was just as haunting as the first day I saw him. I turned it so she could see. I told her of my son's ailment, that he has looked that way since birth, and that I now see that he can be cured here. She tapped my son with her pointer finger. I couldn't gather the meaning by the look in her eyes, but I assured her she wasn't wrong to see that he looked like the calf born here on the first day. She didn't care for that interpretation of her pointing. This time she circled him and gently placed her fingertip on his chest. His name? His name is Alan. The word entered my ear like a love lost to time. A flame kindled inside of me. My son's name is Alan. The girl's mouth is still covered by her knees, but I could see the corners of a satisfied grin peeking out. I asked her what her name is. She froze in thought for a moment before raising her fist and shaking it up and down at the wrist. I chuckled at the display. Thankfully, she joined in the amusement. Shake? Punch, maybe? Knock? She shrugged, accepting that answer, realizing it was no longer worth the effort. Another breeze wandered into the room, this time with much more life. She stopped and quickly peeked around the hay. Sitting on the windowsill with a beak full of berry chunk was a vibrant cardinal. Knock revealed her smile at the sight of it. It was her perfect shot. I looked back down at the family photo before reintroducing the fold and tucking it into the sleeve of my wallet. Our cardinal would soon come. Our perfect shot. The sun dropped from the sky, and with it, my time with Knock briefly expired. I offered her my goodbyes, gathered my filming equipment, and left for the church. The building felt different at night. The shadows exaggerated the cracks and curves of the weathered construction. Candlelight flickered through the glass panes and wove over the grass contained in their squares. Pastor Madison's voice vibrated from the slits in the wood. This building offered me a taste of hope for the first time in over a year, but now a bitter note has seeped into my palate. I couldn't place the reason. Just before entering, I felt a tug at my sleeve. I turned, a bit more startled than I cared to admit, to see Knock, her cleft lip unapologetically visible. A pleasant sight. I asked her what she was doing outside of the church. I told her that she didn't have to follow me inside, that it was okay to remain how she is. Inside, the roar of the congregation extinguished the insects playing their song for the moon. Knock raised her forearms and crossed them over her chest, then pointed to me.
I trust you,
she said through a soft but rusty voice. Together, we crack open the door of the church. The bitter flavor was all the more present. It stood at the altar, its features shift in the midnight snow of its skin. Knock wrapped her fingers around my forearm at the sight of it. The congregation was brought to silence at our step.
What is this?
Pastor Madison called out beyond the walls of the church. Each step we took down the aisle brought more detail to the pastor's expression. Concern, fear, then panic were plastered in his eyes. Doubt crept into me. I considered grabbing Knock by the wrist and pulling her from this place, but she was already out of my reach. Her neck craned to look up at the face of the being now directly above her. It was noticeably taller than the night before. The being extended an arm that unnaturally and methodically stretched across the altar to the chalice.
Where is the calf?
Pastor Madison screamed through a trembling throat. The being extended the chalice to Knock. One of its fingers dipped inside. Pastor Madison peered at her. His face pleaded with her to catch his eye, but she didn't. She caught mine. The bitter taste coated my mouth. The sweet hope was lost. Tears formed in my eyes, and still, with her eyes locked on mine, her forearms crossed over her heart and her head turned to the deity. Her eyes were overcome by a milky white haze, and a smile grew on her face.
I shall.
She answered a question that had never been spoken. Pastor Madison rushed out of the church, colliding shoulders with me on his way. I was choked on the pleads that all wanted to escape my mouth at once. She took a sip, and the crowd cheered. I could see in her smile that her bliss intensified. She hummed a melody that I was sure came to her in that moment, a melody just the same as the woman singing to the cow. Then the bones snapped. The spine compressed, and the eyes bulged from their sockets. All while her hum continued, the congregation began their alien chant. Alan, the calf, and now Knock shared in living death. The being grabbed her new form. Its fingers became spears of speckled shadow, piercing her abdomen and lifting her into the air effortlessly. The chanting now more rabid and ear-splitting. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't even breathe as the being's jaws unhinged with the cracking of falling trees. Knock's unrecognizable form slid into the being until the hum was no more. The crowd's chant again turned silent as they waited for the rebirth. A girl with two perfectly normal eyes and lips standing upon the altar. A girl born anew by pure faith. A girl that never came. The being glided off the altar and into the back room. The nave was void of sound, broken in a moment by the faint cry of a little girl. Candle flames chewed at the remainder of their wicks, leaving the wax in a puddle at their feet. The floorboards rested after their deafening squeals under the weight of the congregation. The altar left vacant. Hours passed since I last saw Knock before I found the strength to leave the church building. Clouds suffocated the moon of its light. Only lanterns dangling from the porches of family homes lit the way back to the hayloft. The lonely hayloft. Tears welled at the corners of my eyes. I wiped them away with my thumb and whipped the tears poking at the back of my eyes with the stern phrase, "One more day." After scaling the mountain of stairs to the hayloft, I creak open the door to see an all-too-familiar scene. A dreadful mattress nestled in iron. Hay bales scattered on the floor. The broken window with a pile of fresh berries in the windowsill. A figure rested on a hay bale. Excitement flushed over me in an instant. The room was draped in a flickering light cast from the lantern at the hip of Pastor Madison. No sight of Knock. His hands clasped together beneath his chin. His lips moved as if to speak, but no words came from them. The once pristine white robe draping from his shoulders is now soured and tattered from dirt, leaves, and thorns. Although this was my room for another night, I couldn't help the feeling that I was intruding. I turned to sneak back down the stairs when his voice stopped me.
Her name was Belle.
His words quivered from his lips, but still had an accusatory stab. I turned to face him. He pushed against his knees to stand. I could see his swollen eyes. With a sniff into the sleeve of his robe, he continued.
I'm sure you didn't know. She never spoke to anyone. But she listened. She always listened, and I believed with full faith that she would listen again.
He paced around me like a shark, his eyes carefully monitoring his next step as he spoke. What happened to her? Where is she? My words stopped his encircling. A snarl curled his lips inward, repressing a moment of rage. The rage simmered in me as well. He continued as if he didn't hear me.
I told her to stay away from the church, and she listened. I told her she was beautiful just the way she was, and she had all the faith in the world that she was.
He turned and stepped a foot from me. His eyes met mine. The inoffensive facade he's worn since the moment I met him shattered in the lantern light.
Then you come.
He pauses for a moment before continuing.
I told her to stay away from the newcomers, and she did. Until you. Now she wants to go into the church. She wants to be changed. I told her she would.
He looked up at the heavens as if gravity would keep his tear ducts at bay. Defeated, he sits back on the hay bale for a moment.
I told her she would see her brother again.
The words were faint like the wings of a gnat. A pause followed, filled only by our breath. What happened to her? I insisted with a stern voice. He eased to his feet with the lantern in hand.
She lost her faith,
he admitted. I tracked him as he walked to the top of the stairs.
Keep the faith, Mr. Dowie. That is all I ask.
He whispered with a growl in his throat. Then he and his lantern faded down the stairs, leaving darkness in their wake. The day of the festival. The morning beat my eyelids open with a blinding ray. I begrudgingly stood from the clutch of the rickety mattress. I looked at the camera gear I stacked in the corner, batteries glowing their solid green eyes as they hang on the sockets in their chargers. I knew there was still a job to be done, but how could I find a minuscule amount of care? I started to grow concerned that I wasn't there to film the documentary anyway. I left the hayloft empty-handed, descended the stairs, and walked. I circled around the family huts. Every face I saw wore a smile. Many of the children danced or ran through the open grass. A couple of residents even waved hello. Still, their voices remained a mystery until I heard a woman call out to me.
Would you like some tea?
I turned to see the wife with the shortened right leg and twisted cane gesturing into her home. I debated continuing in my sulk, but I was beginning to feel a bit parched by that time, so I entered. The interior was just as dilapidated as the outside. Cobwebs dressed the corners of the single room. Splinters of sunlight glowed between the decayed wood paneling. I sat at the table while a kettle dangled by a chain over an open fireplace. I tried to make small talk about the upcoming festival.
Oh yes, we are so delighted to be going home soon.
She said, "Is this not your home?"
No, we've all only been here for about a month. I guess all of us have, except for you. I remember when the pastor finally messaged you. He ruined one of his last good robes in those woods.
My stomach churned. I tried to warn her that we all have to leave this place, that we are not going to make it out of here alive if we do not all leave immediately, that our fate would be the same as Belle's. The sickening snap of her bones echoed in my mind. Her lips turned, not in fear or concern like I hoped, but in pity as she tapped her finger against the handle of her cane.
I was real sorry to see what happened to your girl. But we were all promised a cure. And we have the good faith to get it.
Evening rolled in with heavy dread. People gathered outside of the barn for the festivals. Lanterns hung from broken broomsticks and pitchforks stuck into the dirt in the open field by the barn. The light circled the cluster of people as they danced, laughed, and clapped to the tune of a fiddler with a missing foot. I stood outside the cluster. My camera equipment was still resting in the hayloft. There were no perfect shots here. I watched the tree line. I contemplated making the trek to my car 1,000 times that day to avoid what was sure to be a grisly display. But every time I look, it feels more like a wall, like there was truly no space between the trees. We were all ensnared. A figure approached from the dirt path connecting to the center of the village. I dreaded the deity's approach, but this figure was far too pale. It was Pastor Madison, a sight that made my brow sweat even more. He balanced 2 trays of identical chalices on top of each other in his hands. His robe still tattered from the night before.
Now is the time for each of us. The time to shed our flawed reality and be born anew. Please grab your cup, everyone.
Pastor Madison called over the crowd. the facade glued together again behind a pleasant smile. The group did what they were told, each one grabbing their cup and stepping away from the cluster that formed around Pastor Madison. The cluster dwindled until there was one cup remaining on the tray. Pastor Madison caught me in his gaze in an instant. My spine squirmed within me as he approached. The last cup extended.
Be of good faith for your son,
he whispers through his teeth with the cup extended to my chest. I take it and consider his words for a moment. Despite what happened to Belle, could this still be the only chance my boy has? I looked down into the cup. Black liquid reflected my image back at me. I watched as my face distorted to the ripples.
Drink, and you shall be made in the true image,
Pastor Madison called over his followers. One by one, each of them sucked down the black ichor with hearts full of faith. A portrait of myself on a dust canvas stared back at me again from within the chalice. I turned and walked to the well, dumping the cup into the chasm. However, the sound that arose was not that of liquid meeting its likeness or ichor splashing against concrete. It was a peculiar sound. I peeked over the cobble wall to investigate. A pit of despair awaited me. At the bottom of the pile was the faithless and faithful alike, a mantle of distorted hooves and fur amassing dozens of corpses. At the peak of the atrocious pile lay a body of contorted spine, bulging eyes, and cleft lip. Skin sucked to bone, leaving only the shell. I ran for the tree line, rushing past the collection of doomed followers sucking the last of their poison. A warm melody trickled from the lips of the most eager, an opener for the thunder of crushing bone. I gave myself no time to pity them. The tree line was just meters away and coming fast. I suppressed the sinking feeling of being trapped in there. Escape was my sole thought, even if I had to smash through an invisible wall. The space between the trees caved as easily as the rest of the evening breeze I sprinted through. Realizing that the wall was not constructed by the deity, but by my own fear, gave me a slight ease. But true peace was much farther from this place. I refused to break stride. The bramble and thorns tore crimson twine into my flesh. Their sting went unrecognized as I fixated on the distance. My lungs burned as they filled with gulps of air. My legs ached as they shoved the earth behind me. After what felt like miles, my skin decided to alert me to the damage of what a thorn bush can do. I collapsed. It had to have been 15 minutes. There had to be a break in the trees just a few more steps away. My car, and therefore safety, had to be just ahead. I checked over my shoulder, half expecting the staticky, amorphous apparition to step out from behind a tree and devour me whole. Instead, it was empty between the trees. Only lullabies from the legs of crickets filled the forest. Resting in front of me was a puddle left undisturbed by my frantic presence. In my exhausted state, the sight of water was a blessing. I take handfuls of water and splash it into my face. A reinvigorating coolness eased my body and steadied my mind. A drink was tempting, but the murky dirt swaying in the current of my creation muted this temptation. When the dirt settled and the water stilled, the remaining light of a gruesome day sculpted my reflection. The reflection I had seen all my life seemed special on that day. I fished in my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I pulled our family portrait from its plastic sheath, my wife and I, feigning joy over a pale white void. Carefully, I unfolded the picture, banishing the void to the unseen and introducing Alan to the picture. The one of the few times he could be seen in the photo since it had been taken. I could see his ears slightly spread from the sides of my head in the puddle. His nose thin and pointed, just like the one looking back at me from the water. His bottom lip full and plump, just like that of my wife. I could feel the army of guilt charging, piercing their swords into the back of my eyes. My sorrow leapt from them and into the puddle one by one. My lip trembled under the weight of my shame. I took the wallet back out and holstered the photo, leaving our family intact. The scar on the crease remained, but the sight of all three of us cooled the burning in my lungs, eased the ache from my legs, silenced the alarms from my skin, and for the first time since Alan's birth, prevented the stab in my gut. My journey home continued with a rejuvenated vigor. No longer was I just running away from the horrors of the village, but to my family. The thought of returning to them brought me a joy I hadn't felt in some time. The air felt lighter, the insects more pleasant, the trees more beautiful. After only a few minutes of walking, the forest released me. My car remained unchanged from the moment I left it. Home felt like a short drive away. I fished for the keys in my pocket when I noticed something on the other side of my car. I crept around my vehicle and was left appalled by what lay before me. Eleanor's car, fully equipped with Alan's car seat. The wall I thought was only in my mind was finally in front of me, and I had to turn back. The limbs of the forest tried to ensnare me. Their claws and spears tore crimson threads in my skin, leaking into ropes. The puddles captured a shoe from my foot, causing me to stumble but not fall. I pushed forward with no thought of retrieving it. The twigs and pebbles that made the forest carpet prodded at my bare soul with each stride. Night blanketed the woods, making avoiding their painful afflictions futile. The burn in my legs returned. Sweat arose on my brow. I had to be almost there. What if in my haste I got turned around? What if that thing is keeping me in these woods? Just as quickly as the doubts arose, they were silenced. An eye appeared in the woods, speckled with age-worn structures, the occupants of which were nowhere to be seen. Evidence of their festival was scattered in the field by the well. An eyeful of cups laid forgotten in the moonlight grass, their contents sipped dry. A pair of pants no longer suited for the contorted figure that came to inhabit them. A twisted wooden cane from the woman whose ailment now surpassed its use. The church emitted the flicker of candlelight. That had to be where everyone was. I rushed to it as quickly as my exhausted muscles could take me. The candle flames clung to the last flicker of life as they gnawed at the remaining nub of wick. The puddle of wax escaped the clutches of the candelabras ordaining the windows. The moon hid from this night, leaving the stained glass windows dull and lifeless. Pastor Madison stood at the podium, silent, his eyes not leaving the vacant wood canvas between his clenched hands. Before him was a line of followers filled with the hopes of his teachings. Their bones shifted and snapped out of their sockets. Their spines craned out of alignment. Their eyes were so filled with promise that they now bulged from their skulls. Their legs were twigs, barely reaching the threshold of strength needed to stand. Their protruding knees wobbled under their weight. At the end of the line was Elaine holding Alan on her hip. Their presence in such a place made me ill. I wasted no time in my warnings. I told her what happened, about the cattle with our son's affliction, about the deity that came to cure it, about Belle and the well that houses her corpse. I spoke in such frantic desperation that I must have seemed mad. I studied her face during an insufferably long pause. Her eyes were wide with astonishment.
"Everyone here looks like Alan,"
she whispered with confused amazement. "Yes, and we have to leave," I said as I turned her to the exit. Her eyes were stuck to the crowd of disfigured people. Panic burned in my gut while attempting in vain to pry her eyes from the spectacle. I could feel her stare beginning to break when I could hear a creak come from the altar. The back door was open. Its presentation of the darkness swallowing the room beyond was a call for Pastor Madison to begin his speech. His eyes and spirit remained low.
Tonight is a night of promise, a night of rebirth. As you approach, please do not allow fear to overcome you.
As the pastor spoke, the deity unfolded from the darkness of the back room. Its impersonation of the human form twisted its arms into their sockets, shoulders rolled into their presentable positions, spines stiffening into posture with care for each joint, sending its head to the ceiling. The being slid into position in front of the line like fog. The newly deformed congregation marveled at the figure as if it were God returning to ail their troubles. I pleaded with Elaine to take our son and leave with me. She was in awe of the sight before her.
May you have faith,
Pastor Madison muttered. With that statement, the being lifted the first victim in line with the ease of a father lifting his infant. The woman in the being's clutches hummed a melody through grinning teeth, a smile of comfort and anticipation. Despite her newly acquired form, her original affliction was still apparent. Her right leg was noticeably shorter than the other, the deity's jaw unhinged to accommodate the unsightly collection of skin and bones. I turned to practically shove Elaine out of the church door when I felt it. A flame kindled from within me. The warmth cleansed the fear and horror from my bones. Every ounce of displeasure knotted within my soul vanished in an instant. I could feel the world correcting deep within myself. Then I heard from behind me the shrill glee of a promise kept. I turned to face the altar. The candle flames were rejuvenated. Their swaying light filled the once overpowering darkness. The kind woman that was just moments ago a broken collection of limbs stood at the side of the deity and danced, her feet playing a song on the drums of the floorboards. Her joy was uncontainable. Such a palpable and infectious joy that I had only seen in children before. Tears slid down her face, lining the edges of her grin. She was reborn with 2 legs of equal length. The sight was unbelievable. Moments ago, I was ready to leave this place, convinced that it spewed only lies and deceit, but in that moment, the truth bestowed itself onto me. One by one, each person was taken into the embrace of the deity and consumed, and each one walked out from behind its static form anew. Warped limbs were straightened, amputations were undone, disorders were made orderly. The church was buzzing with laughter and song. My eyes never wandered from the festivities. My cheeks grew sore from smiling. The powers beyond this realm offered themselves to us as correctors, a divine eraser taking away the unjust and unfair afflictions of our world, and I was honored to be one of the first to witness such a great cleanse. The last member to be reborn walked out from behind the deity and to the celebration. He was a boy no older than Bell. The scar that once carved through his hair and down his neck was no longer. The only evidence of its existence sat in our memory. They were all cured. Each one believed in the promise they were told, and each one rewarded with a new life. The manifestation of death was conquered in minutes by this angel. An angel stood at the altar. An angel promised a better life for all of us. An angel now stared right at me. The unification of our gaze brought a deep feeling of honor to me. I knew what it wanted, and I wanted the same. I turned to Elaine and cradled Alan in her arms. He was sleeping, unaware of the miracles being performed around him. His eyelids failed to conceal the entire pale cornea of his eyes. His neck bent backwards with its usual violence, and I could see the veins running through his needle-thin arms, raising the crimson waters over the bone hills of his elbows. Mist filled my eyes as I looked over him. I was proud of him. I was proud of who he was, and what he had lived for. I looked up at Elaine. Her expression said what we both knew. She extended Alan to me with grace. The broken cocoon that housed our son was ready to be shed. The candlelight felt even brighter when I took Alan into my arms. I took precaution to not jar him as I transitioned between steps. The aisle stretched for miles. The festivities ceased. The newborn congregation watched my son with warm smiles, ready to accept him in his new form. They began their chant in a soft and caring whisper. The foreign language had a gentle touch to the ear. Listening to their chants, I knew it must have been the language of heaven. The fact hit me like the warmth of a summer's sun. The deity stood just feet away from us. Its eye divots remained steady under the waves of its features. They stayed focused on us as we approached. The closer we came, the more its human form muddled at the border, like the container was cracking to the pressure. It may have been a trick of the eye from the candlelight, but the constant folding of its features appeared to mold a smile. I stood before it, feeling unworthy of its presence. The smell of sweet fruit enveloped my nostrils. My neck strained to meet its crater eyes. The jostling void on its head molded to the bare minimum to be considered a human-looking face, yet the bare minimum was the most beautiful face I'd ever seen. My cheeks went from a sore pain to a numb acceptance of the smile I'd been wearing. It was as if love and joy manifested in front of me in the form of pure beauty. A song came to me in my bliss. Humming to the tune was as natural as breathing. I knew I had never heard such a melancholic melody before, except maybe once, from Belle. It felt comforting that her song would come to me in that moment, that in some way she would be redeemed by my faith, by my son's faith. The deity looking down at me with the loving eyes of a father reached towards Pastor Madison. Its arms was as long as the task required. I watched it elongate to bridge the divide between it and the chalice in the pastor's hands. With the ease of wind, it brought the chalice to my chest. One of its spear fingers pierced the surface of the water within. The black of the finger dissipated into the water, transforming it into the image of the angel, a serving to the impure, an offering to the unworthy. In its dim reflection, I watched the face of the being, unaltered as for the first time it graced me with its words. "Shall you drink of me, and I of you?" Its voice was otherworldly. It was all of creation offering their gratitude and the Creator giving their blessing. It was all things. It was nothing ever heard before. The fire of happiness licked just beneath my skin, blackening my insides. The world beyond that chalice vanished. Nothing had any matter or consequence once I heard its words. All I wanted to do was obey its every command. I wanted to devote everything I was to it. I took the chalice. It was ice to the touch, as if it was pulled from the depths of the Arctic before being placed in my hand. The candle flames were white in color. The gold cup glistened against their glow. The chants from the congregation boiled into a synchronous shout. Their passion warmed me further. It fueled my desire to worship and obey. "I shall," I whispered. My acceptance invited my God's hand. Palm to the heavens and pointed fingertips rested delicately in a row. My son was still resting on my hip. His poor body crumpled at my side, resting the beautiful soul buried within. The hand of God beckoned for him, offered to mold the body in the image of the soul. I handed him my son. The hand grew to accommodate his small frame. My son now in its possession. My destiny lied within a cup. God's fingers wrapped around Alan. A cup filled with ichor of his blessing, filled with a life void of imperfections. My hand raised my son to the ceiling, my lips pursed around the rim of the cup, warming the frozen rim. I opened my eyes to watch the ichor roll to my lips. The divine chants boomed from the crowd. God's jaws opened to the size of my son. I met myself at the rim of the chalice. The ichor was still in that moment. Plastered on its surface was a shot as imperfect as a shot could be. Tears had been leaking from my eyes without my knowledge, eyes that saw the truth once and allowed it to muddy before them, muddied in a milky haze, the eyes of Belle. In an instant, the burning white candles became their dying selves once more. The sweet smell of fruit turned to a suffocating, damp rot, and the God I had just offered my son to turned to the monster I knew it to be. Without hesitation, I splashed the being with the ichor of my cup. The liquid kicked steam into the air at contact with the being's flesh. A screech that pierced my eardrums cut from the depths of the creature before its black form receded to the shadows on the floor and darted into the back room. My son plummeted from the ceiling. I dashed to him in a panic, stretching my arms out to save him from the harsh wood below. The sound silenced the room. Even flames of the candle ceased their flickering. Only my breath could be heard. I could feel a heavy weight in my arms, his weight. Alan was safe. I held him close to my chest, thankful for his safety. Elaine ran to us and wrapped us both in an embrace, truly together for the first time. A scream only born of pure anguish broke through the air. Pastor Madison rushed to a figure sprawled onto the floor where the being once stood. He fell to his knees and scooped the figure into his grasp. It was a boy. At one point, it was a boy. A boy no older than 2, judging by the tiny, severely decayed body. Patches of bone poked through the rotted flesh at its chin, brow, and forehead. An arm was snapped from its body on collision. The clothes tattered over the boy were stained the color of liquefied death, yet the pastor mourned him as though his death was fresh. Stroking the remaining hairs that clung to its scalp, watching them fall onto his palm. A father in need of a son, holding the body in need of a soul. I took Elaine by the hand and carried Alan down the aisle to the exit.
You took my daughter! Now you bring my son to me! That's my boy in that disgusting body! His soul belongs to my boy!
The pastor shouted through the sorrow in his throat, his final plea to an empty church, his congregation undoubtedly shriveled at the bottom of the well, his faith finally lost. 2 weeks after the festival, the moon ushered in another day. I gave Elaine a kiss and offered to take Alan to bed so she could rest after her first shift back at the hospital. I took Alan up the stairs, listening to their joyous creaks. He was as beautiful as he had always been. I was grateful every night that I could see it. He was a little fussy still, so I decided to calm him with a story. However, before I could rifle through the books on his shelf, I no longer heard him. The fussing required more energy than he had in his little body, and he rested. His chest delicately pulsed. I could hear the slight hiss of air passing through his nose. I placed my hand on the crown of his head and rubbed his forehead with my thumb. As I eased him into a comfortable sleep, I heard a tune, a familiar tune sung in the chirps of birds. Standing on the windowsill was a vocalist singing its haunting song, a vibrant cardinal pecking at the berries that were never there.
Apparently, there was once a city in the north of Sweden called Corona, but somehow, we've all forgotten about it. I'm a police officer working in Kalix, a municipality close to where the lost city of Corona is supposed to have been. At that place, there are no signs of the city, only a dense forest. But certain details related to my own family makes me certain this place was indeed real. The entire world just forgot about it. I can't imagine how or why, but it's the only conclusion I've been able to reach. For me, this all started when 2 Romanian blueberry pickers came into my small office to report something they had found deep in the dense forest. They didn't know enough Swedish or English to explain what it was that they had found, but it was immediately clear to me that it had terrified them completely. From what I understood, it seemed to involve a human corpse. Eventually, after having brought in an interpreter from the town next to mine, it was revealed that they had stumbled upon a dead child, no more than 10 years old. They led me and 2 of my colleagues, followed by an ambulance, to the location where they had found the child. The sun was setting behind a thick mist when we got there. I lit a cigarette when we left the main road and walked into the forest, to where the child was supposed to be. I felt a bit uncomfortable having to deal with a dead child, but I had handled cases like this before, some car accidents, and didn't feel too affected by it now. It was just another job, more so I thought. The Romanians stopped when we got close and refused to go any further. There was panic in their eyes, more than I expected even given these extreme circumstances. One of my colleagues stayed with them while the rest of us continued. We soon came upon a huge boulder that had been placed there by the ice sheet that covered Europe during the Ice Age. My colleague walked around it, and a few moments later, he came running back, pale as if he had seen the devil himself. He bent down and puked right in front of me. It's on the other side. I didn't ask him any questions. I only proceeded to check it out for myself, with the medics following behind me. What we found on the other side of the boulder, it wasn't natural. Half the child, a blonde little girl, was fused with the boulder, just as if she had been passing through it as a ghost and then suddenly turned into a human before she had time to exit the rock. Or, as my colleague later remarked, it was as if she had been teleported into the rock. The girl's sorrowful, dead gaze into the forest seemed to tell a story of tragedy unknown to the living. The medics quickly shielded away from her eyes in silence, horrified by the fate she must have suffered, but I couldn't look away. I've never been a religious man, but this experience made me doubt everything I'd believed before. I don't just mean the bizarre way the poor girl had lost her life, half engulfed by the boulder. There was something else about the girl as well, something that made me feel completely empty inside. just as if a piece of my own soul was ripped out of me, leaving an empty hole in my heart that quickly filled up with a sorrow I'd never felt before. It was a dreadful feeling, only made worse by the strange fact that a small part of me recognized the girl. I couldn't tell from where. Her face was like a vague memory of a dream recently forgotten. We collected ourselves and started talking, trying to make sense of the situation without any success while the medics approached the body. I tried to focus on the hard facts while we investigated the scene. The girl was wearing a pink jacket. In one of the pockets, we found an odd-looking flower. Its colors were exotic and resembled the wings of a beetle, and a yellow library card with a text that puzzled us. The Library of Corona, it said. The girl had written her name on the card as well. When I saw it, my world started spinning. Isabella Lexelius. It said in the girl's childish handwriting. "Isn't that your last name, sir?" My colleague said. It is. I didn't know what to say or think. "Well, do you know her?" I don't know. No, I've never seen her before in my entire life. It must be a coincidence." "That's a pretty big coincidence, sir." I didn't respond to that. "There's something on the ground as well," one of the medics said. On the blood-stained moss beneath the girl, there was a notebook. It must have fallen out of her hand, the one that was hanging limply above the book. I picked it up and opened it. The pages were covered with small text, written with a different handwriting than the girl's. "Sir," one of the medics said, "we'll have to bring some tools to cut her down." "Yes," I said absently. "There's one more thing," the medic said. I put the book in a plastic evidence bag. "What?" "There's too much blood." The medic pointed to the ground. "What do you mean there's too much blood?" I asked. "Beneath the boulder, sir." The medic explained. "It's impossible for that blood to come from a child." A moment of silence, and then I said, "We'll have to come back here with better tools." A day later, we successfully removed the upper body of the girl and brought it back to the morgue where it was examined. We also tried to lift the boulder with the help of a crane, but it wouldn't budge. Instead, we dug a hole under it, but we didn't find any new body parts. All we could do this day was sample as much of the blood as possible. During the examination of the body, I read the notebook. It contained the story of the city of Corona. I was convinced it was fiction, a deranged story written by the man I thought must have killed the girl, until a few weeks ago when the forensic lab called me. I still have a hard time believing it, but they told me there's no other way. They had tested the DNA of the girl and compared it to mine because of her last name. It was my idea since I didn't want anyone to suspect anything. We didn't think it would reveal anything, but it did. The 10-or-so-year-old girl, Isabella, was my daughter. I was sure it wasn't possible. 10 years earlier, I lived with my ex-wife. I never cheated on her, and certainly didn't have any children with her. We stayed together for 5 more years, so I would have known if she had had a baby during that time. And yet, there was nothing wrong with the test. Here's the transcript of the notebook. I've typed it out here in hopes that someone will remember the city of Corona or someone who might have lived in it. Please contact me if you have any information. This is what was inside the notebook. 5 years ago, I was a different person. I was younger back then, not just in the ordinary sense, but in spirit too. There was joy in my life, and I had hopes and dreams. That's all gone now. I don't have much time to write this down, but I will try and explain what happened to us, to our entire community, as well as I can. The event, as we have come to call it, occurred on July 9th, 2013. I was only visiting Corona over the day to take my niece Isabella to the grand opening of the Red Grove, the city's new amusement park. It was supposed to be the biggest one in Sweden, and Isabella had begged her parents to go to the grand opening, but neither of them had been able to due to work. So they called me and asked me to do it for them. I was their go-to person for when they needed help with Isabella, the only one they trusted. How I wish that hadn't been the case now, considering what happened. We arrived pretty early, a few hours before the opening, so that we wouldn't need to stay in line the whole day to get inside. The weather was amazing. It had rained earlier in the morning, so we had been a bit worried, but when we got to the city, there wasn't a cloud in sight. Isabella couldn't stop talking about how much fun we would have, and it warmed my heart to see her so happy. It took us a bit longer than expected to get to the amusement park, since one of the main streets had been closed off for a military parade. This didn't bother us that much. It rather increased the feeling of celebration in the air. To avoid the parade, we had to take a bus to the city center, the Freya Square, and from there, we had to take the subway to the yellow neutral business cluster, the tallest skyscrapers in Sweden. It was possible for us to walk to the Red Grove from there. There were people everywhere. It turned out that a lot of them had taken a ferry down the river that I didn't know about. This meant we had to stand in line after all. Isabella didn't mind, but I knew she would get hungry soon, and I worried that it would ruin her mood. Luckily, there was a man selling hot dogs from a cart that was pushing down the line. I bought a hot dog and soda for Isabella. Her parents didn't really like it when I bought her junk food, but a day like this, I thought they would understand. The man was also selling red balloons to children. Isabella said she wanted one. I tried to tell her that she would have to carry it around all day, that there would be more balloons inside the amusement park, but she wouldn't listen. Reluctantly, I bought her a balloon as well. At this point, no one knew that their entire lives were about to change in a matter of minutes. Isabella accidentally let go of the balloon. I feared it would make her sad, but it didn't seem to bother her that much. We looked at the balloon as it rose up into the air and drifted away. Soon, it was but a red dot against the vast blue sky. Then suddenly, it vanished. "Where did it go?" Isabella said. I couldn't explain it. It had just disappeared. I don't know, I said. Maybe it popped. But something, an uneasy feeling I couldn't rationalize, made me doubt that. Then, only a few minutes later, strong winds came from every direction. It carried a smell with it that reminded me of something rotten. "Ew," Isabella said as her long hair was blowing in the wind. "What's that smell?" I held her hand harder. I don't know. People looked around, confused, and their joyful voices became concerned. Something was happening, but no one knew what it was. Sirens echoed in the distance, seemingly coming from the business cluster. "Oh my God," a woman said and pointed towards the skyscrapers. The top of the building is gone." It wasn't that easy to see, but she was right. The top of the tallest building was gone as if it had been cut off with a knife. Isabella was too short to see it, but she picked up that something wasn't right on everyone's faces, and she became worried herself. I think we need to get out of here," I said, acting completely on instinct. "I don't think it's safe." Isabella teared up. "But the opening, aren't we—" "We'll come back later, sweetheart," I said as I walked away from the crowd with her. One of the ferries were just about to leave. We quickly stepped aboard. A few others joined us, but most of the people stayed behind in hopes that everything would be sorted out. Isabella cried, but she wasn't mad, as the ferry slowly drove away from the riverside promenade. A commotion of some kind erupted among the crowd back on land. I couldn't see what was going on, but suddenly everyone screamed in terror and tried to run towards the water. They were clearly escaping from something, but I couldn't see what it was. All I saw was people stepping on each other while they tried to jump into the river and swim away. It was a horrible sight, and I'm glad Isabella wasn't tall enough to see over the railing. Next, the sirens from the emergency alert system began blasting its eerie sound of imminent catastrophe. Everyone asked questions no one had any answers to. Most people I heard thought we were under attack, either by terrorists or the Russians. I picked up my phone to call my sister, but there was no signal. I tried with Isabella's phone as well, without any luck. I soon discovered that no one had any signal. At the sides of the river that passed through the city, people were looking out of their windows, trying to get a glimpse of what was going on. But the only thing they could see that was out of the ordinary was the cut-off building in the yellow neutral business cluster. "Look," Isabella said and pointed at the sky. "I've never seen such a big bird before." An enormous bird-like creature soared high above us. It was pitch black, although it was impossible to say for sure. It seemed to be just as confused about seeing us as we were seeing it. It circled the city center a few times and then flew away again. The sight of the giant bird, or whatever it truly was, turned our anxious confusion into terror. We still didn't know what had happened, but now we knew it didn't have anything to do with terrorists or some foreign power. This was something else. Something impossible to believe and yet at the same time impossible to deny. The ferry led us off a bit further down the river, close to the Fraser Square. People seemed to be in a state of panic, although no one knew what was wrong. Some were packing their cars to escape the city, others were running somewhere, perhaps to their loved ones, but most people clustered around police officers, city workers, or military personnel from the parade to try to get some information. But they only got the same answer over and over again, yelled at them so that it could be heard over the sirens from the emergency alert system, that nothing was known and they needed to return to their homes and listen to the radio for more information. "How are we supposed to listen to the radio when the power's out?" The voice came from an old woman. "Look around, there's no power." She was right. "Go home and close your windows and wait for the power to come back," a policeman said. "We don't know what's going on, but the safest thing to do is to follow the procedure." He was interrupted by something happening a few meters away. The first person who had tried to leave the city, a man on a loud motorcycle, had come back. I was carrying Isabella, comforting her at the same time as I tried to hear what the man on the bike was trying to tell everyone. I pushed through to get closer to him. He walked to the center of the square and climbed up on the foot of a statue. A few people believed him, but everyone that had seen the creature in the sky had no doubt that he was telling the truth, however impossible it seemed. "There's no way out," the man yelled. "The main road's cut off at the edge of the city and there's only jungle. I can't explain it. I'm sorry, but it's true. We are surrounded by a dense, thick jungle. There's no way around it." "Then it's true," a policeman whispered to himself next to me. "For the love of God, it was all true." I asked him what he meant. First, he didn't want to acknowledge my question, but when he saw my confusion and tears in my niece's innocent eyes, he turned to me and said quietly, "Before we lost contact with the helicopter that was surveying the parade, the pilot said something that simply didn't make sense. He was crashing. Something had cut off his rotor blades, and he said that it all had changed somehow. The view had changed. Before he hit the ground, he yelled that he had seen a jungle to the west and an ocean to the east." More and more rumors came in, and even though it was impossible to tell rumors from facts, they were all telling the same story. The entire world around the city had been replaced in an instant. The city was the same, but the sky above it wasn't. Eventually, the screaming sirens went silent. Cars stopped beeping their horns, and the cacophony of voices died out. An uncanny silence fell over the city. The feeling was beyond unreal. I didn't know what any of this meant. I tried to explain it to my niece, but she was only 5 years old. She couldn't understand. She wanted to go home to her parents, and I didn't know what to tell her. She was tired and needed rest, so I went to the hostel nearby and paid for a room. Soon, the economy of the city would collapse, but for the first few days in this new unknown world, people still accepted money as payment. What followed was 5 years of unending trials and hardships. A continuous battle for survival with no hope for help or rescue. It started during the first night. The sun, identical to our own yet new and strange, sat due north instead of west and was replaced by unrecognizable stars covering the entire sky. As I looked up at them from the small window in our room, I didn't feel awe, but rather I felt completely lost. The strange feeling during all these years must have been the paradoxical sensation of familiarity on the streets mixed with the awareness of total displacement. I think this was partly why people kept close to the city center, to drown themselves in the illusion of being home even though they knew, deep down, that they couldn't escape their fate as stranded in the unknown. Then, as I leaned out the window, I heard the sounds. People screaming, gunshots, cars driving madly through the streets without anywhere to go, and the occasional odd howling that made my blood run cold. I never saw anything of what happened that night, but it changed the population. More than 2 million people. Forever. I closed the window and hid behind the bed with Isabella. She wanted to cry for her mother, but I kept my hand over her trembling mouth. The next night was calmer, probably because no one dared venture outside. During the days, I soon realized the threat didn't come from the unknown jungle outside of the city, but from the people within it. It was impossible to tell how much crime was committed, but given what I saw with my own eyes, looting, robberies, even murders, I figured the rate of crime must have gone up by a lot. However, it wasn't total anarchy. The police and the few military units that had been in the town for the parade kept some vital order to the community. Since ordinary people didn't have guns, the police and the military weren't threatened by the average citizen. A leader stepped forward, the man on the motorcycle, and after a few weeks, everyone seemed to cooperate peacefully. The food that was left in the stores was mostly distributed fairly, and everyone that could work seemed to do it without hesitation, even I. The scientists that had been working at the university at the time of the event couldn't figure out what had happened, but with the help of hundreds of citizens, they managed to build a small nuclear power plant that could return electricity to the city. I mostly helped out with that project. I didn't know anything about nuclear physics, but I did what little I could. It was amazing what we were capable of as a people, and in all my dreadfulness, a feeling of pride grew in my chest. Although, our time in this world wasn't simple. Far from it. Aside from my personal problem with keeping Isabella healthy and safe, which I succeeded with although she never felt safe, there were 3 major problems that kept growing larger for every week. First one was the food and water situation. Some people had managed to grow wheat and potatoes in parks and soccer fields, but it wasn't enough. We were running out of food and water. It did rain from time to time, but very few people felt safe drinking the rainwater. To battle this problem and to find solutions to some other problems as well, expeditions were sent out to explore the jungle. These typically ended the same way. That is, with no one coming back. Only once or twice did someone manage to return to the city, but they weren't themselves anymore. It was as if something in the jungle had captured their souls and let their bodies walk back unscratched. The second problem was nature. It seemed to have spared us the first couple of months, but soon after we got the electricity back, it turned on us. It took a while before I saw it with my own eyes, but seemingly at random, mysterious creatures entered the city. Sometimes they just walked right through it, never to return again. A policewoman, one of the new recruits, told me that she had followed a naked blue child as it solemnly walked into the city and then back out of it again. At other times, indescribable monsters wreaked havoc on the streets, killing as many people as they could before returning to wherever they came from. At one point, and this I actually saw for myself, an enormous centipede, pure white with hundreds of red eyes, suddenly appeared from a manhole. It quickly climbed up against a building, as if it knew exactly what it was doing, and entered one of the windows on the top floor. Next came the screams from people inside the building. A few escaped, but everyone else inside were ripped to shreds. Only after about 5 minutes did the centipede exit the building from the entrance, its white, segmented body stained with blood, and returned down the manhole. These attacks, as they were called, aroused fear and panic in all of us. Although it didn't happen that often, it happened often enough for everyone to be on edge all the time. The third problem also didn't become noticeable until later. It was the problem of health. There was no pattern to who was affected or not, but some people, probably more than 1%, got sick. It started out like a fever and slowly progressed with nightmarish mutations randomly hitting the body. Most of these mutations made the victims handicapped and disfigured, but sometimes, very rarely, the victims developed properties that were seemingly beneficial to them. The most extreme case of this that I saw was a young girl who grew a third eye in the middle of her forehead. The iris of the new eye glittered with amazing colors, and the girl claimed that she could use the eye to see other people's emotions. At the beginning of the health crisis, the sick people were treated badly, as if they had been monsters from the jungle. This treatment only got worse when it was revealed that the creatures from outside never attacked the sick. At one point, a mob gathered at Fraser Square, set on chasing the sick people out of the city. Luckily, this was stopped by the military. In the end, however, the sick people were sent into the jungle. Not to be away with them, though, but to make use of their immunity to the nature of this world. This turned into a huge success that eventually solved the food and water problem. They could venture out and explore the surrounding area and return with edible fruits, vegetables, and small mammal-like creatures that they had hunted. This was a turning point for us, and then luck struck again. All attempts at fishing had failed so far, but all of a sudden there were fish everywhere in the river. We soon learned that there were different periods for when the fish were out to sea or close to land. However, as soon as they came close to land, mysterious purple thunderstorms that lasted weeks tormented the city, and yet we survived. Many people didn't, of course, but life was possible. In the end, we prevailed. During the 5 years that followed, there weren't that many catastrophes, and our focus on survival kept most of our thoughts of home away. Even Isabella thought less and less of her parents as she grew older. Over time, most people got used to the bizarre situation they found themselves in back in July 2013. Many people did commit suicide, yes, but most people chose to live in this unknown land. 2 events, however, changed things. First, it was what happened to a planned expedition at sea. Hundreds of people, mostly men, decided to venture out into the ocean with one of the luxury cruisers that had been moored next to the city. This was going to be a great adventure and perhaps a way to find some answers to where we had ended up. It inspired all of us. Thousands of people, Isabella and I included, had gathered to watch as the huge boat slowly sailed out. It all felt similar to that day 5 years earlier when we had waited for the amusement park to open. We all stared at the horizon as the boat, named Puerto de Espero, turned into a small dot against the setting sun. We imagined the amazing adventures they would be on and looked forward to their return, but then something that must have been larger than anything that we'd seen so far came out of the water and swallowed the ship whole. Some people screamed and others cried. This was a hard blow to the city. Just knowing a being like that, a being able to eat an entire luxury cruiser in one bite, could exist, deprived many people of their hopes of the future. The next event was different. It was a miracle, to say the least. It happened only a month after the destruction of Puerto de Espero. A military guard, a young man who had been only 15 at the time of our disappearance from Earth, discovered that when we stood at a certain place at Fraser Square, he could tune into a specific radio station from our old world. The station's name was Synthwave Mix and dedicated most of its broadcasting to that kind of music. Hope returned immediately, but this time the hope was different from the one we had spent 5 years building up within ourselves. This was the hope of seeing our loved ones again, the hope of returning home. The people at the university investigated the area to try to determine where the radio signals were coming from. They didn't have much success, but soon realized that they emanated from the ground beneath Fraser Square. While the area was investigated by scientists, ordinary people showed up en masse. They all had radios of different kinds with them, like children carrying stuffed animals to feel safe, hoping to tune into this synthwave mix and to get a taste of their lost home. Of course, the area where the radio station could be heard was too small, and police had to chase away everyone to give the scientists the room they needed. A few days later, though, the scientists placed a set of large speakers at the foot of the statue of Fraser and connected them to the receiver they were using to listen in on the radio station. Day and night, the relaxed, somewhat melancholic, synthetic music played non-stop to the entire city. People congregated around the statue. They even defied the dangers of night. This became our city's new tradition, ending the day by going to the statue and sitting down around it as if in prayer became our pilgrimage. It wasn't exactly the music that drew people to the square, but rather its origin. Still, the electronic melodies soon turned into a symbol of all of our hopes and desires. From time to time, people got up and danced, sometimes while crying from a bittersweet joy difficult to explain. Although, the thing that made us all go silent and become totally focused was when the host said something. Usually, they only spoke about the music they were broadcasting, completely unaware that an entire city full of people were listening to them almost religiously. But on rare occasions, they talked about the world outside. At those times, it felt like our hearts collectively stopped in anticipation. Would they say something about us? About their efforts to figure out where we had all gone and how they would bring us back? But there was never any news about us, just as if they'd already forgotten about us or never known about us at all. The tragic fate of the city of Corona never came up. Yet, we never lost faith. It took a long time, and now I'm getting closer to the present day, but eventually, the scientists decided that it would be worthwhile digging a large hole right where the radio waves seemed to sip out of the ground. This was no easy task, and neither was it safe, but the work took weeks. Again, we all helped. No one really knew what exactly we were looking for. We only knew that it was something. When we reached the bottom, where the rock was too hard to dig through, a mountain of dirt covered the entire square. Our efforts hadn't been in vain. We discovered, right beneath the place where the radio waves had been picked up, there was a small hole in the bedrock. People were asked to back away from it while the scientists investigated it. First, they tried to measure how deep it was. This took some time since it was hard to find a long enough rope. In the end, it was estimated to be about 700 meters deep. Next, some equipment was sent down, tied to the end of the rope. Everything that was sent down was swallowed up by the hole. Of course, no one knew where it went, but we all thought the same thing, that somehow it had returned home. It was a reasonable assumption, given that the only thing coming out of the hole, the radio waves, came from Earth. We all rejoiced in this discovery. More experiments were done, and although some questions remained unanswered, the consensus, even among the scientists, was that the hole really was a portal back to our own world. There were two large problems that needed to be solved, though. The first was the safety. Every time something tied to the rope disappeared at the bottom of the hole, the rope was cut off, just like the skyscraper 5 years earlier. This meant that it was possible that whoever entered the hole would be cut off as well. However, this problem was solved pretty soon by tying a camera to the rope, connected to a screen above ground. It was discovered that the rope was only cut off when pulled back. As long as it wasn't pulled back, the screen still received signals from the camera. The camera never recorded anything other than darkness on what was assumed to be the other side, but since it continued to work until the rope was pulled back, it didn't seem to be such a big problem. After all, some technical issues were expected under the circumstances. The second problem was that the hole was too small for anyone to fit into. Many attempts were made to widen the hole, but the bedrock seemed to be made out of stronger material than any of our machines could tear into. This was extremely frustrating. It made us feel like we had reached the finish line only to discover that we were unable to cross it. In the end, one of the scientists said she wanted to send her 10-year-old son down the hole. He was small enough to fit into it. This was widely debated for some time before it was approved. The mother argued that the city of Corona was no place for her son, and that all evidence suggested the hole was the only way home. The boy was brave. He knew he would probably never see his poor mother again, but still went through it. He was given a walkie-talkie, and after a tear-filled goodbye to his mother, he was sent down the 700 meters deep, pitch-black hole. He was instructed to radio in after he reached the other side, confirming he was safe. After the rope was pulled back, the mother waited and waited for her son to report. However, he never did. For weeks, the mother sat at the edge of the hole, under merciless heat and under pouring rain, calling her son over and over again with her walkie-talkie. No one knew what, if anything, had gone wrong, since no other radio waves had been picked up other than the synthwave mix. It was possible that other radio waves simply couldn't enter into our world for some reason. Still, the authority deemed the hole too unsafe for anyone else to enter. This didn't change people's minds, though. The hole represented the only true hope we had felt in years, and given all of the terrible things in our world that could destroy us at any moment, as easily as it is for us to blow out a candle, the small risk of going through the hole seemed to be more than acceptable. The hole was guarded by the police, but most of the police shared the city's collective opinion that the hole was the only way out. Not for any of the adults, but for our children. And now I'm sitting here, in the room I paid for 5 years ago, writing this down. During the last few weeks, many parents have been sending their children down the hole at night. This world is truly no place for them. Although they could survive, they deserve better. Hence, like many others, I've decided to send Isabella home. When I told her about it, she looked at me with happiness in her eyes I hadn't seen since we were transported to this dreadful, God-forsaken world. I've been writing this all day now. It's a testimony to what happened to Corona. I will give this notebook to Isabella. I'm sure that she will be able to give it to her father. Somehow, I know it in my heart that she will find her way home to her parents. Soon it will be dark, and I will bring Isabella to Fraser Square one last time. I'm sorry it took so long.
Subject 23, Project Entryway, derivative of the Montauk Project, and an absolute horror show. My name is Joshua A. Jameson, and I was part of the United States Air Force from 1978 to 1998. I spent the first third of my service as a pararescueman, and that much I'm proud of. The other 2/3 is eating me away inside. Now, for starters, I'm going to let you know that I'm going to avoid flair and filler. I will, however, provide you with what little evidence I've retained over the years. Skip over it if you want, the truth remains the same. I've noticed that the infamous Montauk Project has gotten a little more notoriety over the past few years, and most of us have heard the story by now. Military scientists kidnap children and expose them to torture, all to try to unlock innate abilities. Most notably, the ability to conjure something out of nothing. The sister project of Montauk, Project Entryway, has stayed silent even over the growing years. I won't let that stand any longer. Us at Project Entryway followed a similar direction as Montauk, with the only major difference being that we weren't trying to make something new. We were trying to find something already here. While the geeks over at Montauk tried to conjure up vases and monsters using their minds, we were trying to explore the unexplored. I can't tell you how the scientists got involved, mostly just folks from Brookhaven Laboratory, I'd guess. But I joined when I heard about a long-term joint forces mission needing volunteers to form medical and security details. Well, as a pararescueman, I had both, so I applied to the job's posting and submitted my resume and hoped for the best. I got the job. Soon enough, I was being flown down to New York with 3 other security guys, being ushered down to Camp Hero. At this time, no one really knew about Montauk. The internet was in its baby phase, and fear from the Cold War left the information, what was available, double encrypted and ciphered. As far as we were aware, Camp Hero was just another radio site. After our landing and a bit of a drive, we hit Montauk Point, New York. We passed through the small, friendly-looking town and through some forest before reaching a small, gated military outpost. The only thing of note was a large radio tower, which we all expected from our research. Our driver pulled up to the security checkpoint, and all of our gear was confiscated. I'd assumed they'd search it and give it back to us, but instead, they just threw it in some vault, and I never saw any of it again. To make up for our stolen gear, they gave us brand new uniforms, along with whatever else we needed. Me and the rest of the security boys weren't used to this kind of treatment. It was just too clinical for the usually sarcastic and snide security police members we were used to. Our whole conversation consisted of this. They'd ask a question, we'd answer. They'd ask if we needed anything, we'd say no, and then silence. I'm not sure if the boys we interacted with knew what was going on inside of the facility, but they sure as hell didn't try to make friends with us. Given enough time, we were geared up and ready to go. The captain in charge of in-processing told us our debrief would be first thing that following morning, and for us to try and get some rest if we could. That's when a few uniformed men escorted us across the field and into the radio tower. When we entered the facility, we walked right to the communications center, staffed by only a handful of men, and down a tight hallway. We found ourselves facing a large concrete door. A few guards nearby pushed it open, exposing a flight of stairs leading straight downwards. Wherever we were going had to be in the bowels of the earth. The stairs seemed to continuously descend. Our walk down took whatever courage we had. There was a certain electricity in the air that was unnatural. It didn't feel like you were being watched. It felt like you were alone. I think we all took a deep breath of stale air when we hit the bottom of that staircase. What lay in front of us now was a hub of hallways and doorways. People in lab coats were walking around, conversing and eyeing us. We were guided over to our living quarters, separate from Montauk security members, of course, and we were once again instructed to get some rest. Now, one thing you should know about military members, no matter what branch, we're all just kids. We talk, we gossip, we're inappropriate, and when you leave us to ourselves, we do the opposite of what you want. We were told to sleep, therefore, we were told to chat each other up like giddy schoolchildren. It was then that I got to know everyone. There was Bobby Wilkerson, former speech champion from Washington State. Then was Gregory Caparelli, all-star college baseball player from Jersey. And of course, Tanaka Yoshida, a child of Japanese soldiers during World War II and the biggest American patriot I knew. Why did I tell you their names? Well, because they deserve to be remembered. They were good people who just wanted to do the best they could out in the world. Each had dreams. They all wanted to be something when they left the service. Bobby wanted to be a congressman, Georgie wanted to work for his father at their lumber mill, and Yoshida just wanted to retire as a United States serviceman with full honors. That's it. That's all they wanted. After our brief yet giddy exchange of words, we managed to get what little sleep we could. One thing I remember about sleeping down there, once the lights went out, that place was darker than dark. We were God knows how many feet underground, and there was absolutely zero natural light. Once the man-made lights were out, all lights were out. After an undetermined amount of time, morning must have hit. We were all awoken by a scraggly-looking and frail scientist. He introduced himself as Dr. Grant Hargrove and asked us to follow him to the experiment area. We walked down the maze-like corridors, passing all sorts of men from all different backgrounds. Some seemed disheveled, while others seemed to stare off into space. Besides a few whispers between each other, this facility was dead quiet around us. After a couple of minutes of walking, we reached our destination, a big metal door with black paint reading Sub-Project 23 in blocky letters. Dr. Hargrove turned towards us and began his speech.
Inside these doors is where you'll spend most of your time. We don't have much funding, so the four of you will have to do for security. You can work the details of that on your own as long as we have 2 armed members inside of this room at any given time while our experiment is running. You are to take the title of Squadron 08-23.
At these words, we glanced at each other. 4 members certainly didn't make a squadron. At our glances, we heard Hargrove make a grunt before continuing.
Yes, I'm well aware there are only 4 of you. It's just to provide leeway in case members need to be exchanged or replaced in a timely manner. If you have any questions, you may only ask them to me or one of the other scientists involved in Sub-Project 23. You won't speak a word about what we're doing to anyone, including the other workers down there. Understood?
His tone was matter-of-fact and rehearsed. Who knows how many times he's told this briefing, and who knows what happened to the others that were working down here before us. I had always hoped we were the first, but something tells me we weren't. He turned his back to us and typed in some numbers into a small keyboard next to the door. We heard several clicks as the locks disengaged. Hargrove opened up the door for us, and we stepped inside. The room was a massive concrete rectangle. The ceilings had to have been as tall as a small auditorium. The only structures inside this facility were right next to us, a set of steps leading up to an observation post. A door, similar to the one we just entered from, stood at the top of the step. The steps themselves seemed to be nothing more than a glorified rolling stepladder. There were indents in the concrete floor, allowing the stairs to be pushed away from the observation door. Strange, I remember thinking to myself. We're dozens of feet underground in a highly fortified facility. What good could these extra safety measures be in place for?
Each of these doors are installed with 7 magnetic locks, 4 divided on the top and bottom and 3 on the side. They can withstand about 1,500 pounds of force each and can only be disabled with the code of the day. The codes will change daily, so make sure you check the logs in the observation room up those stairs.
He lifted his frail-looking arms toward the observation deck. Sir, what will be our daily duties? I heard Bobby's soft voice ask. The doctor tried to give a warm smile towards Bobby, but it seemed pained and forced.
Hopefully, all you'll have to do is sit down in front of some machinery and let us scientists do our work. If something should happen to us, you may have to provide security or search and rescue operations.
We all looked at each other, then back to the nearly empty warehouse. The only thing standing out in the barren room was some metallic pillars and beams aligned to the opposite side of the room from the observation deck. Wires ran from the pillars straight into the concrete of the nearby walls.
Search and rescue? As in here? In this room?
Georgie's loud Italian voice echoed in the concrete shell we found ourselves in. Dr. Hargrove's gaze turned behind us, his eyes defocusing and forming into thought.
In a way.
He muttered quietly, more to himself than us. Before he could clarify, the door to the observation room clicked open, giving a loud groan as the metal fought against the arms of whoever was pushing.
Jesus, I get these doors, but really?
A voice rattled off from behind the door as it opened, eventually revealing a man of good stature. He looked like one of us, a serviceman rather than a scientist, though his lab coat expressed something different.
Hey everyone, sorry for interrupting. My name's Dr. Carter, and I'm the exploratory scientist of this project.
He gave a charming smile before nodding towards Hargrove.
I overheard Dr. Hargrove mentioning saving one of us. That will most likely mean me. In case something happens, I just want to say I'm appreciative of you guys. I know you're in the dark right now, but we're going to be doing some exciting things down here.
Dr. Carter flashed another smile, exposing his pearly white teeth. Dr. Carter was clearly more of a people person than Dr. Hargrove. Just behind him stood half a dozen other scientists writing things on clipboards, pulling levers and activating switches. It was such a large room, yet the only space that seemed to be in use was the observation room. I could feel my hair stand up as a feeling of apprehension came over me. Something was off here. I was just a normal kid for the time we were in. I never much watched science fiction movies or shows. I never believed in the boogeyman, and I believed wireless phones were the work of the devil. What I was seeing made me double think all of that. Well, except maybe for the devil part.
So, Dr. Hargrove, if you wouldn't mind stepping up here and taking control, I'm going to introduce these guys to Project Entryway.
Dr. Carter eagerly headed down the metal stairs, skipping a few steps here and there.
Oh, you guys are going to love this.
He waved his arms at us, beckoning for us to follow. Dr. Carter took us nearly all the way to the other side of the facility before stopping and turning around. I saw his eyes meet Hargrove's in the operations center. Carter lifted his hand and gave a thumbs up to Hargrove.
You guys might want to close your eyes and open them when I tell you to. Most people faint after seeing this their first time. Brains can't process it much, but exposure helps.
I saw Georgie cover his eyes with his hands and turn around, heeding the doctor's advice.
Oh, forget this,
Georgie muttered under his breath while shaking his head. Bobby, Yoshi, and myself all decided to keep our eyes on the empty concrete wall in front of us. Within just a few moments, we heard the whirling mechanical sounds of machinery coming to life from the metallic pillars jutting out of the floor. Before we knew it, something appeared in front of us, or rather, stopped appearing. The back wall completely disappeared into a thick and syrupy black shadow. It seemed to give out a pulse that made our bodies react in the worst way. It felt like whatever this thing, this shadow was, had the power to radiate the symptoms of vertigo. Each pulse sent a wave through our brains that told us to look away. I saw Yoshi and Bobby both fall to their knees beside me. Bobby had buried his head into his lap and covered his ears, trying to stop the pulsing from getting into his mind. Based on how he was acting, I don't think it helped.
This wall is now a door, gentlemen. A gateway to another plane of existence. If you haven't already viewed it, then please look.
Georgie uncovered his face and turned around. Immediately, his face turned a pale and sickly color.
We've ran test after test to get this right. We brought you in because we're finally ready to send a person through. That'd be me.
Dr. Carter stood in front of us with a wide grin on his childish face. His back was towards the pulsating black void behind him. I couldn't help it anymore. I threw up. We all exited our meeting that day without a word between us. We received our mission statements and were told the testing would begin next afternoon after a morning of calibrations. We had off until then. It wasn't until we entered the mess hall that one of us spoke up.
What the fuck did we sign up for?
Georgie mumbled angrily to his food. I don't know, man, but just stay positive. Maybe it's not as strange as we think it is, Bobby replied, trying to reassure our little group.
Not as strange. A fucking wall disappeared. Fucking gone. And what took its place? A goddamned...
Yoshi cut him off as his voice was starting to rise in anger.
Remember what they said. No talking about it unless we're in that room.
Georgie listened to Yoshi and quieted himself down, shaking his head in disbelief. I had nothing to add to the topic. I still felt sick and my head wouldn't stop pounding. I dreaded the morning. Sadly, as much as you dread something, it doesn't stop it from coming. We were woken up a little later than usual as the science crew did their calculating. It didn't help much. I think we were all still shaken up about what we saw the day prior. In light of that, we all agreed that each of us would sit in to see what was going to happen that morning. We grabbed our weapons from the armory and headed to the project room. Once inside, we saw nearly 3 times the previous staff walking back and forth. They must have had the whole project's science division prepared for what was about to happen. We took some seats near the observation room staircase and watched the men work from afar. Amidst all the lab coats running back and forth, we saw a man who looked like he came straight from the moon. He had heavily padded and sealed-off clothing with a wide visor. There was no other way to describe him. He looked like an astronaut. The rest of the crew did function tests on his gear, checking the pressure levels and making sure he could see properly through the visor. A few lab techs dragged out a large piece of machinery with a large bundle of wires and tubes attached. They hooked up a large tube to the man using a fist-size opening at the small of his back. At this point, I could safely assume that the individual inside the suit was Dr. Carter. I didn't envy him for what he was about to do. I did, however, notice the 4 other suits similar to his stacked up on some crates near the far side of the wall. I knew those would be ours if something happened to the doctor. All the prep work took upwards of an hour. They were trying to make everything as suitable as possible for what they were trying to do. Soon enough, the scientists backed away from Dr. Carter and joined us on the opposite side of the room. Their expressions ranged from giddy to frightened. I don't know what tests they ran before this, but no one seemed to know what to expect. I heard an exchange between the scientists while we were waiting for the next step. It's a 10-minute trial, right? No exploration today, just making sure the device works. I saw the other gentleman nod his head. The room fell silent as Dr. Carter turned around and faced the operation room. He gave the thumbs-up signal and turned to face the far wall. Everyone watched intently as the machines whirred to life, casting away the matter that made up the wall and exposing the void underneath. Over the intercoms in the room, we heard Dr. Carter's voice.
Testing. Testing. Can you hear me?
That's affirmed, Dr. Carter. We are good to go with the test run.
Dr. Hargrove's emotionless voice rang out over the loudspeakers. He walked towards the void until his face was inches from it.
Should I say something important or memorable?
Carter's voice jokingly said over the speakers. You could hear the fear he was trying so hard to cover up.
It'll be okay, Carter. We have security standing by.
Hargrove's voice responded. I felt my body tense up, realizing that he was referring to us.
Well, how about our mission motto then? Damnant quad non-intelligent. Hopefully saying that is true and we have nothing to fear.
He gave a slight chuckle to himself before quickly stepping into the void. The instant he disappeared from our view, the loudspeakers exploded with sound. High-pitched screeching poured over us, sending some lab technicians to the ground, covering their ears. My team and I stood up in reflex, aiming our rifles down the portal. Just then, the sound abruptly stopped, and a figure emerged from the inky blackness. The thing was big, with a single large eye reflecting the room like a predator in the night. I could feel the tip of my finger tighten around the trigger before I realized what it was. It was Dr. Carter. Less than 1 second after stepping through the portal, he emerged back. Hold! One friendly stepping out! I called out to my team, each lowering their rifles at my words.
Oh, thank God! I thought something happened to all of you.
Carter called over the intercoms.
I talked for 10 minutes straight and got no response.
The technicians all ran to help Dr. Carter take off his suit and take vitals. There was an odd red powder all over his uniform. They tossed each article of gear he had into hefty plastic bags and tossed them aside. His brow was drenched with sweat, and he was breathing heavily.
We need lighter suits,
he said while gasping for air. I looked up to the observation deck and saw Dr. Hargrove and his team quickly going over notes and handling some machinery. Soon, Dr. Hargrove reached for his microphone.
Carter, all your transmissions came back within a second. All 10 minutes of it. Were you really on the other side for the full time?
Dr. Carter reached for a microphone off one of the techs and spoke.
Sure as hell was. It's different over there. I counted my time and came back when I hit 10 minutes in. I guess we didn't factor in possible time discrepancies. It's going to make things harder for communications.
Hargrove and his team upstairs talked for a few minutes before returning to the microphone.
Communications are going to have to be one way then. We'll be able to slow down your voice, but you can't speed ours up before it gets to you. Next test we'll try the one-way system. But give us a report on what you saw.
Carter arched his back, trying to crack his fatigued bones while doctors took his blood.
We definitely found a new place. I didn't explore very far, but I did note that I saw what looked like a city skyline not too far ahead. Maybe an hour's walk or two. The gear had the same weight as well, so no distribution of gravity.
As Carter was recalling what he experienced, Dr. Hargrove rapidly took notes.
Also, I heard, I don't know how else to phrase it, moans? Off near the cityscape. Hundreds of beings, maybe. I couldn't tell if they were in pain or not, but it definitely was some sort of moaning or screaming. I can't be sure, but I think I might have also seen some things walking around.
Explain.
Well, they were far at first, human-shaped. Maybe a little taller than a person? They seemed to see me, but I couldn't make out any features on them. They were far away across the sands and all I could see was blackness. They looked like they were made of the same material as the gateway. They were getting closer the longer I was there. Had to have been a few at the start, but by the time I came back through, it was closer to 12.5. They didn't seem to walk, just kind of, I don't know, got closer? Glided, maybe.
Did you feel threatened by them?
No, at first it seemed like they were just observing. I'm not sure if they wanted to make contact with me or what, but they didn't feel right. They aren't like you or me. They just are. Like I said, I couldn't see them that well, so maybe I'm overthinking it, but they seemed like standing shadows that had some sort of mass to them.
Carter's voice finally trailed off. Even from our distance, I could see he was shivering.
Understood. Debrief with me in private. We're shutting down the gate for today, everyone. Dismissed.
My team headed back to our room. We were all a little uneasy by what the doctor had described. Given enough time, our unease became the norm. The next few tests were more trial runs. Much of the same happened. Dark figures in the distance, moans from the city, and audio issues. Eventually, they worked the last part out, though. They slowed down the recordings in real time so we could hear everything that Dr. Carter says. Though it's odd to say the least to watch him step back through the gate with his voice still echoing over the loudspeakers, like he was still out there. With the audio fixed, Phase 2 started. Exploration. We were woken up that morning with the knowledge that something new was going to happen. What that entailed, none of us knew. The day was starting a little earlier than most. My team and I were told to be ready by mid-afternoon. Up until then, we could sleep in or get some food. We spent that free time choking down some food and pondering in silence. Today was the big day, Exploration Day. The test was scheduled to be the longest by far, totaling an astonishing 36 seconds on our side and 6 hours on Carter's. That allowed him to travel 2 hours to the city, 2 hours to account for exploration and possible fatigue he might have, and the final 2 hours to make it back home safely. It definitely was going to be a rough day for Dr. Carter, regardless of the outcome. Luckily, it looked like he was more than ready. When he entered the facility that afternoon, we were greeted by a now familiar sight. Lab coats of doctors and technicians blowing about as the people wearing them rushed from place to place. Having nothing to offer at this point, we took our seats near the observation deck and listened to the conversations of the eggheads in front of us. That's when I overheard something that still haunts me. Up until now, I thought of the gateway as being a portal to another world, somewhere far away, I had imagined that the things Dr. Carter had encountered were billions of light years away. I guess I was wrong.
Is there any way something over there could get to us?
A lab tech asked one of the scientists jotting down notes.
I don't think so, but I could be wrong. The whole place inhabits the same space we do. It's just blocked off from us. Theoretically, if we can interact with them, that means they can interact with us. Or perhaps we're on a higher plane of existence, in which case we can affect them, but they can't affect us. And what if neither of us are natives of that place? You said yourself that this dimension of space was the easiest to program into. What if something else programmed into it as well?
The scientist put down his pencil and gave a half-hearted chuckle.
Well, then the odds that we're from the higher plane of existence drastically falls apart.
I thought about what that meant. I still do. Everything Dr. Carter saw while on the other side was somehow around us, occupying the same space. When he stepped through the portal, he was still technically here, just also not. Something about that, about the fact that it was right here, right next to us, scared the shit out of me.
Dr. Carter, are you ready?
Dr. Hargrove's voice echoed out around us. The mass of lab coats filling the center of the room dispersed, leaving only Carter and his suit visible.
Hey, you know me, Hargrove.
Can I get that in a yes or no statement, please?
Hargrove gave a wink and a smirk as he stood in the observation room, clipboard in hand.
For you, anything.
A few scientists gave a slight chuckle at Carter's difficult nature. The doctor then patted down his suit, looking for any flaws.
Everything seems good on my end. Pressure's still golden and audio seems to be operational. Want to get the timer down here?
I looked up at Hargrove as he said something to one of his assistants. The young tech then ran out of the door carrying a rather large tripod with a thick television-sized screen on top of it. The assistant brought the device midway between the observation deck and the metallic pillars. He grabbed a cord and plugged the machine into one of the nearby walls. As soon as it had power, it showed the numbers 36. 36 seconds. For 36 seconds, Carter would be gone. For those seconds, he'd make a 6-hour journey into a city we couldn't see and make it all the way back home safely.
Well, are we good to go?
Carter asked while looking up at the observation deck. Hargrove nodded in response and began to flip some nearby switches. The familiar buzz coming out of the pillars resonated inside the concrete box. We watched as the wall fell away into the familiar void once more.
Wish me luck, boys.
He turned around to face the gateway before glancing back at us.
Please get me back if something happens. I'm counting on you guys.
We nodded in response. Our faces didn't show it, but I can vouch for all of us when I say our hearts were pounding against our chests.
36 seconds.
He muttered and gulped down as he stepped through the portal. Hargrove's assistant hit the button on the counter, and the half-a-minute wait started.
I hope you guys can hear me. By this time, it's probably been a fraction of a second for you, but I've begun my walk towards the city.
27 seconds.
The Shadow Men are still here. Still far away. But they're facing me.
19 seconds.
I can already tell we need to work on these suits. Jesus, is this going to be a long walk?
12 seconds.
Should be pretty close to the time I get back, huh? Lucky future me.
4 seconds. At this point, you could see sweat pouring down our foreheads. 4 seconds meant 40 minutes for Carter, plenty of time for him to make it back, but seeing the single-digit countdown from the timer brought a sense of paranoia with it. A loud resonating beep came over the loudspeakers as the clock hit 0. As a precaution, this meant we were to gear up immediately in case of emergency. My team quickly got up out of our seats and rushed over to the supply area. Lab techs were already standing by with our suits ready to go. As soon as we made it to the gear, a slight sucking noise came from the portal. All of us turned our heads and faced the gateway. Standing dead center in the void was all the gear that made up Carter. He slowly crept forward, his feet dragging slightly under the weight of his suit. He looked like he was in pain.
Go, quickly, take off his gear and give him some air.
I called out to the techs standing near our equipment. They looked at me, shocked. They weren't used to being bossed around by security. Luckily, they noted the urgency in my tone and ran over to help. Carter fell down hard on the concrete floor. A loud, muffled slam came from underneath him. Both the doctors and their assistants quickly rushed over. Me and the rest of the guys traded glances. I had some medical experience, but nothing like the doctors around us. I heard them undoing the straps around his face mask before ripping it off. From my position, all I could see was several men falling over backwards with horrified looks on their faces. I quickly ran over to see what was happening, only to discover an empty faceplate. As they took off more and more of Carter's gear, they discovered less and less. Carter wasn't inside. Nothing was. "Gear up!" I called out to my crew. Dr. Carter was missing, and it was our job to find him. Our supply guys rushed back and began to help us put on our gear. It took around 10 minutes to get completely outfitted. That meant Dr. Carter was already missing on his end for close to 4 days. His voice, however, was still ringing out over the intercom, talking about nothing more than his walk towards the city. I felt like a ghost was talking to us. Hargrove's voice came over the loudspeaker with a venomous tone.
"Your primary objective at this point is to find Dr. Carter's visual recordings. Secondary priority is to find his person. Do you understand? As soon as you find his recordings, you bring it back."
Visual recordings? I remember mumbling to myself. Then it hit me. After every debrief, Carter would have a private meeting with Hargrove. These meetings must have been a showcase on the visual recordings Carter obtained. They had us in our uniforms instead of prepped and ready in the suits. The longer it took us to gear up left a larger chance that whatever got Carter had moved on, leaving the evidence behind. Dr. Carter had to have known our main priority wouldn't be to save him. That's why he asked us personally to search for him and bring him back. Hargrove only cared about his pet project, not about anyone involved. It was at this point I could feel my hands clench up into fists, watching each of their reflective helmets do the same. It was time to begin our true mission. We each approached the gateway. It looked different up close, and it was hard to focus your eyes on it. Every millimeter of the dark matter seemed to explode outward, then contract back in. The void was in a constant and eternal motion. When we approached the gate, the tar it was made of seemed to reach out just a little bit further, as if it was trying to reach out and pull us inside of it. I bit back my urge to try and run from this godforsaken mission, and so did my team. Without another word, we stepped inside. Dr. Carter never revealed the feeling you get when you step inside the gateway. My body felt like it was transforming, like a horrible growth pain. I felt my skin being pulled and tugged while simultaneously being pushed away from my body. The feeling only lasted for a few seconds before we all appeared on the other side of the gateway. In front of us stood the reddened flatland that we had imagined during the last few weeks. It was exactly like we pictured, flat land covered in red sand that the wind would kick up every few seconds. I glanced around and saw the massive portal behind us. It looked the same on this end that it did on the other, a pulsating, incomprehensible mess.
Hey, you hear that?
Georgie called out to us. I listened closely and heard what he was talking about. Moans and bellows coming from a very long ways away.
That must have been the sound Dr. Carter was talking about. It doesn't sound right.
Bobby chimed in. He was right. It didn't sound like someone with a broken bone or fracture, nor did it sound like a melancholy drawl. It sounded very much alive and visceral.
Well, I guess we should head towards it, huh? I think I can see the skyline coming from that direction.
I peered through the sand gusts and looked closely. Very vaguely, I could see what looked like massive towers jutting out of the ground, spiraling up towards the reddening sky. They looked unfinished. The shadows of scaffolding could barely be seen looming over the tops of their unfinished roofs. I looked around once more and saw nothing else. I didn't like that one bit. Every single time Carter went through, he described the shadow men watching him, yet we were all out here alone.
Let's move.
Yoshi instructed, and I nodded in agreement.
The sooner we head towards the city, the sooner we can get back home.
So our walk began. I'd like to say we saw things out there, other buildings, people, creatures, but the fact is, we saw nothing other than that ever-growing city in front of us. The towers we once squinted to see grew clear, as did the buildings below them. We were about 10 minutes outside the city before our feet hit pavement. There was a long road hiding underneath the red dust of the land that reached straight into the city. When a strong gust of wind took hold, the dust would shift, exposing vehicle light reflectors and white lines. I felt a chill ran up my spine as I thought back to what the scientists said. We were still on Earth. We just weren't in our usual spot. I pushed those feelings aside and pressed forward. As we neared the first building on our walk, I noticed the material it was made of. Glass, stone, brick, everything we'd used back home, yet I saw nothing on our whole walk that could constitute where they got these materials from. I reached out to feel the building under my gloved hand, and a voice startled me back to reality.
Holy shit!
Georgie called out. Our heads followed his gaze. Ahead of us, a few dozen meters down the road, was one of the shadow men Carter had mentioned. Whatever this thing was, it didn't seem to belong here. The being's body had begun to pulsate and shake furiously. It seemed like it was made from a less stable version of our gateway. Eventually, it stretched itself out thin, quickly becoming more translucent before vanishing before our eyes.
What was that? I don't like this.
Bobby whispered softly, his voice creaking under his anxiety.
Where do we even begin to look?
Yoshi asked directly to me, obviously trying to maintain mission focus.
Well, if I was stuck outside that portal all day and could only see the skyline of this place, I'd try to go to the biggest tower I saw.
The others glanced forward. A few miles ahead was the largest skyscraper in the city.
Let's head out then.
Bobby said as he gripped the rifle in his hands tighter. We walked down the barren streets, surrounded by nothing but screaming. It was clear they were coming from inside each building, but curiosity or not, I would never be willing to lead my men into unnecessary danger just to explore.
One cut is all it takes.
A voice whispered.
Did you guys say something?
I asked out. I knew I had heard something under all the howling voices around us. My team all shook their heads and pressed on.
Can you see us?
Hey, stop walking. I know I heard something.
I barked out as I began to look around.
Are you dreaming yet?
That time I heard it straight in my ear. Not on the outside of my suit, but in there, with me. I could almost feel their breath wrapping around my face. I pulled my rifle up and aimed it towards the voice. I saw my team raise their weapons up with me. I don't know if they heard what I did, but they stood by me.
Jameson, by your feet!
Bobby said as he quickly dropped to a knee and began surveying the area. I looked down and froze. On the red sands below me lay footprints, long, talon-like claws. They had been following us since we entered the city, and none of us had noticed. What made things worse is they were facing towards me, circling my body every step of the way. I felt my body begin to grow weak. I heard a shot ring out from Georgie. I looked over and saw the barrel of his rifle aiming towards the glass window nearby.
There's something in there. I saw it. I don't know what it is, but it's in there.
The fear in his voice spiked. I could see by the way his feet kept shifting he was fighting back the urge to run. My mind started buzzing at this point. I started losing touch with reality. My mind fluttered in and out. I saw things I shouldn't have seen. Children playing in the middle of the street, their faces peeling away by an unseen force. People jumping off buildings only to crawl back inside of them with their broken bones and large piles of squirming bodies viciously ripping into each other's flesh. What set me off most, though, were their faces. They had a look of ecstasy to them. The more pain they received, the more pleasure they displayed. My eyes gave in, and I let the blackness take over. I woke under bright artificial lights. There was a bubble of plastic around me, and my body felt broken. I glanced around and saw people dressed in hazmat suits. They were eyeing me with their clipboards.
Joshua A. Jameson regained consciousness in 1704 on the 27th of August, 1984. Muscle spasms have lessened with the introduction of morphine. His eyes show movement and dilation to light. Brain function seems to have returned.
I wanted to speak out, but found a lump in my throat I couldn't swallow. I let my eyes travel to the blockage and saw a large tube going through my esophagus. Even with the medications they were giving me, I couldn't let my mind escape from this place. I felt the adrenaline rush through my veins, keeping me awake. Even so, my body remained still. At this point, I began to wonder if I was paralyzed.
Joshua?
I heard a familiar voice call out.
This is Dr. Hargrove. You and your team were gone for 1 minute and 58 seconds on our end. We managed to reel you in using your life support tubing. Do you remember anything?
Hargrove put on his best sympathetic voice while hiding behind his hazmat mask. I began to feel my vision start to vibrate once more. I could see Hargrove look down at me with disgust before signaling to a nurse to give me more medication. Before I knew it, I was out once more. The next time I woke up, my body responded to my commands. I still felt pain, but it was manageable. This time, I was strapped down to a chair in Dr. Hargrove's office.
Glad to see you awake again, Jameson. Sorry about our previous meeting. I was just a little overzealous for answers. We're confident your condition has improved since then. So tell me, do you remember what happened?
I struggled to talk, but I felt a stabbing pain in my neck. The hole they cut into my throat was still healing.
No, please don't explain. I'd just like simple replies, as in yes or no. Raise your fingers on your right hand if yes, and your left if no. Understood?
I struggled to raise the fingers on my right hand. I felt them crackle and pop under my skin. They felt unused and weak.
All right, Joshua. So back to my first question. Do you...
I cut him off and raised the fingers on my left hand.
Okay, I'll keep note of that. Do you know what happened to your team?
I raised my fingers on my left side again.
Thank you, Joshua. I want to see if it's possible to kick your memory back into action. We have the video recording of what happened out there. I'm going to show it to you, and if by the end of it you remember anything, just let me know.
Hargrove gave a thin-lipped smile before walking over to a television set. He produced a rather large DVD and put it into a video player. I know to most of you this doesn't seem like a big deal, but this was the 80s. DVDs didn't officially exist at this point.
While you were asleep, we went ahead and cut out most of the footage that we deemed not necessary. So let's begin where you entered the city and where you lost consciousness.
The doctor hit the play button and the video started. Immediately, I heard my own voice.
Did you guys say something?
My voice called out to my squad. As I watched the recording, I noted my movements were more rapid than I remembered. I jumped from one thing to the next in a fraction of a second. Eventually, I looked back to my partners and they shook their heads in response. I began to walk a few more feet before stopping again and crying out at my group.
Hey, stop walking. I know I heard something.
I saw the camera jump as I lurched myself forward, raising my weapon close to eye level. The video quickly shifts back and forth between me looking at the rooftops and the nearby buildings. I mouthed the next words spoken by Bobby.
Jameson, by your feet!
The video aimed toward the red sands at my feet. The talon marks still showed up on the video, which brought a faint feeling of relief to me as I continued watching. A loud bang knocked that relief away as Georgie fired off his round. I looked at him as he pointed his rifle towards the glass windows nearby. I looked closely at the footage and swear the shadow inside that building was moving. And by shadow, I mean every damn inch of it. A hulking mass of void blocked out any light from reaching inside. At this point, the camera begins to wobble back and forth as my feet began to lose any sense of sturdiness beneath them. I collapse down to one knee and start to breathe in and out heavily.
Jameson, are you alright?
Yoshi asked, reaching over to me. I looked up at him and nodded. From here on out, I don't remember a thing.
Yeah, I'm fine. Let's keep going.
The voice was definitely me, but I most certainly had no recollection of it. From their footage sped up, the only sounds that came through were my loud, labored breathing. Every once in a while, my vision would aim towards the sand, exposing more strange footprints. Some just seemed to appear around me. Eventually, my team and I found ourselves standing near the entrance to the skyscraper.
You ready to head in, guys?
Bobby asked as he tilted his head upward at the top of the high-rise.
Let's just get in and get out. If he's not in there, I say we call it quits for the day.
Georgie replied. In the footage, I began laughing before shaking my head. I felt a growing tension rising in my body. I might not remember much, but I knew something was about to happen.
What about these?
I said as I pointed down to our life support cables.
Dr. Hargrove said we have about an hour without them, in which we can move around and explore.
I looked at Yoshi and saw the reflection of my face in his visor. I was grinning.
All right, we'll take him off and head up.
Georgie said as he loosened his tube. The others followed suit. The camera panned down and showed me undoing the cables on my back. There was something wrong. Right near the small of my back was a tear in the fabric. I had been completely compromised. After we undid our tethers, we entered the building. It seemed simple enough. It was just a dark lobby with a place for a secretary and a large lounge room. We moved past the desk before reaching stairs leading upwards.
There's no way we can walk to the top with all of our gear on. Not under an hour, at least.
I said to the group.
Maybe there's another way.
We walked back near the entrance before spotting 2 small elevators.
There's no way in hell those are gonna work,
Georgie said as he walked towards them. I heard a snicker come from my mouth before my hand reached out to the call elevator button. With a ding, the doors opened, revealing 2 small elevator cabins.
I don't believe this.
Bobby mumbled under his breath. I motioned for the group to get together.
We'll start at the top and make our way down. If the doctor isn't there, we might be able to see him through the top windows. It also looks like we're going to have to split off for a bit. Bobby and Georgie, you take the elevator to the right. Me and Yoshi on the left. We'll meet on the top floor.
The crew nodded, their faces showing nothing but trust in my leadership. Please, stop this, Hargrove, I squeaked out, pain filling my throat. No more, please. Hargrove looked over at me with false pity on his face.
Are you remembering, Joshua?
I wanted to say no, but things were starting to come back. Meanwhile, the footage kept rolling. Bobby and Georgie squeezed into the elevator next to ours, while Yoshi squeezed in with me. I heard the elevator next to us click shut, but my gaze turned over to Yoshi.
Are we going, Jameson?
He asked me. There was confusion in his eyes. Once again, I saw my face in his visor. I had an animalistic grin taking over my features. I reached for my rifle as Yoshi pressed himself against the elevator walls. With one swing, I struck him in the face with the butt of my rifle, breaking the pressurized glass shielding and impaling shards through his skull. He crumpled down at my feet, clearly unconscious but not dead. I stared down at his collapsed form and swung my rifle around. I prayed that I'd just shoot him and that would be it, but I knew better. I took my rifle and began jamming the barrel repeatedly through Yoshi's face, each thrust causing me to grunt and yell as if this was somehow Yoshi's fault. Once I was confident in my handiwork, I lifted the barrel of my gun to my face and gave a labored and hefty laugh as his flesh dripped down the metal of the rifle. Soon after, I dragged his body out into the lobby, pulling a chunk of reinforced glass out of the hamburger meat that made up his head. I then walked out to the life support tethers and began to cut each one apart. How I managed that feat leaves my mind boggled. They had hundreds of pounds worth of strength applied to them. Even a gorilla wouldn't be able to cut them into shreds like I had been able to. After a few brief minutes, that deed was done, and I stood up, gasping for breath and laughing. The only cable left untouched was mine. I turned back towards the lobby and entered the bloody elevator. I pressed the button to the second to the last floor. As soon as I arrived, I launched my rifle through the elevator controls and began walking towards the staircase. As I got closer, through the static, I could hear Georgie calling out for Yoshi and me.
Hey, you guys alright? We saw the elevator stop a floor too early.
Yeah, I don't like this.
I said back to him.
We could use an extra weapon down here. Have Bobby provide cover at the top of the stairs and come down here and meet with us.
Roger that.
Georgie said. I felt my stomach lurch. I begged Hargrove to stop the video, but he refused. I heard Georgie's footsteps quickly descend the staircase. I positioned myself behind the entryway so as to not be seen. Georgie walked right by me and never had a chance to defend himself. The shard of glass I used to cut the tethers found itself in the back of Georgie's spine. He collapsed hard against the floor and struggled to breathe. I took the glass from his back before gripping his rifle. I positioned the top of the barrel against the small wound affixed to his spine and pressed down. I could hear the sound of Georgie's spine being crushed under the metal. His body began to spasm the more force I applied. Eventually, the rifle hit a spot with no resistance and pressed down straight through his sternum and into the floor. He stopped moving.
One more. One more. One more. One more.
I kept moaning to myself in the recording. I felt disgusted. It sounded as though pure ecstasy was washing over me. I walked towards the staircase and began sprinting up them. Bobby turned to face me and saw the blood on my suit. He immediately raised his weapon and took a shot. I landed flat on my back and began laughing with lustful energy. I lifted my head up and began to fondle the bullet hole in my chest.
Come on, Bobby. At least make sure you kill me.
I slid up to my knees and heard the popping noises of rounds going off. My white suit now drenched in my own blood when round after round pierced through my body. I craned my neck and looked at my friend. He had emptied his clip and was now trying to reload.
Do you see them, Bobby? They're all around us. Cutting, stabbing, hurting, and loving. Pure emotions. Pure, raw emotions.
I began to get to my feet, blood pouring out of my wounds.
I'll make you see them, Bobby. I'll make you see paradise.
I reached over to the desk and flung it with inhuman strength towards him, knocking Bobby to the floor.
Breathe, Bobby. Breathe.
I slurred out as I slumped towards him. While he writhed on the ground, I lifted up my boot and smashed his visor along with his nose.
10 minutes, Bobby. That's all I ask. 10 minutes. Breathe in and out.
Bobby lay nearly comatose near my feet, but I could see his suit rise and fall with his breath. Once more, the film speeds up. It shows me staring at Bobby and swaying back and forth. After about 10 minutes, Bobby's eyes open with a certain feral fear to them.
Shh, just look, Bobby.
I grabbed his suit and dragged it towards the window, breaking it down with my fists. Glass fell against my suit, ripping it open along with me.
Do you see them? A city full of people getting the most pleasure any of us could ever imagine. Forget God, forget the devil. This is true paradise.
My hands reached out and lifted Bobby towards the window. His eyes widened as he saw things we couldn't see on camera.
Come on, Bobby, it's time!
I struggled out a laugh as my arm shoved Bobby out of the window and let go. A few seconds passed before a loud thud echoed over the empty city.
My turn now. Then your turn, Hargrove.
I choked out another laugh before launching off the skyrise and hitting the ground. That's where the footage stops. I stared at the black screen for a while, with tears running down my face. I killed Bobby, Georgie, and Yoshi. I killed them for no reason, and I couldn't even remember doing it to them. They deserved to be remembered. Hargrove asked me a series of questions, all fairly standard, and most I didn't have a reply to. I knew exactly what happened, but I couldn't conjure up how or why. The biggest question Hargrove had was how I did not only survive that fall, but also tethered myself back up to the life support line. I wish I had an answer for him, but I don't. He asked if it could have been Dr. Carter. Once again, I could only reply with, I don't know. At this point, most stories would end with the big bad government killing me to keep things quiet, but they didn't. They gave me a cushy job dealing with paperwork. They listed my injuries as standard wartime trauma. I was paralyzed from the waist down from the fall. Every time I look down at my wheelchair, I remember them. The only reason they keep me alive is so I can be observed daily for any side effects of my trip. I heard Camp Hero was eventually shut down. Some people say some kid conjured up a monster back in time or something. I don't know. It wasn't my job to know. I do believe, however, our experiment put the nail in the coffin for that place, though I have no idea what happened after I left. I'd imagine Dr. Hargrove gave his speech at the doorway labeled Subproject 23 to a group of new guards that never heard about my team and I. And once Hargrove opens the door for them, they're greeted by a new Dr. Carter, who's bright-eyed and ready to explore.
Do you think we're dead?
I gave Eleanor a perplexed look. I can see your breath, and we're talking right now, so...
No.
She muttered, shivering in the keening wind.
Not here. No sense in asking that here. I mean, out there.
I stared out past the dark sea, reaching to the horizon and likely further still than I could ever conceive of. They say hell is hot. As I sit on the ramshackle heights we fight every day to maintain, the cold clawing at my skin, I truly wish it was. My mother used to say, as long as you tried. Those 5 words hammered strength into my psyche. They once gave meaning in battling hardships and misery. Now, that's a dangerous epithet. You're free to try if so inclined. Just know that none of us will even try to save you when your belly is sliced open and your guts slurped by the creatures that dog this place. We've had our fill of brazen souls out here. They serve to be torn apart in our place. I suppose it's something to be grateful for. The braver you are, the quicker you'll learn. Bravery is as insubstantial as death in this place. I should backtrack. I'm an extremophile. Always have been. Ever since the first time that adrenaline rush flooded my veins, I was hooked. Water sports, base jumping, spelunking, anything you can name is likely under my belt. The one activity I found myself coming back to was mountaineering. Ever since my dad took me up to Mount Snowdon, there's been an inscrutable urge to summit something higher, something steeper and harsher. This leads me to my most recent trip, summiting Monte Rosa's tallest peak, the Duferspitze. My climbing partner and good friend Rob climbed it in 2018. He shared plans of a second summit, so I took him up on the offer. I say climbing partner, but with my skill level, I really mean guide. Rob's expertise blow mine out of the water. Nothing much of interest happened on the drive. Long, boring, standard overall. When we arrived, the parking lot serving as our starting point was empty and quiet. Dead still. There was an air of unease lingering around us. Around me, at least. If Rob felt it, he didn't show it. But it was there, and I should have taken it as a warning. That's retrospection for you. Looking up at Monte Rosa made everything seem so insignificant. Its monster of a rock face stood mighty and gazed out across the landscape. Ants beholden to a molehill in its dominance. God help any who climbs it. Instead, we planned around the Marinelli Couloir, a steep and snow-laden gully. We triple-checked our mandatory gear. Ice picks, crampons, ropes, etc. All present. Clear and cold mornings were forecast for the ensuing week. Perfect climbing conditions. Rob's meticulous planning was impressive, to say the least. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little envious. The mountain hut alone was a 4-hour climb. Though the terrain was forgiving, hard-packed snow crackled below my crampons. A reassuring sound. Inside was cozy. The walls were insulated well, and the wood stove was stocked with more than enough firewood. Yet, even as the fire roared, a chill crawled up my back. Just like the parking lot, we were alone, and the nagging intuition in the back of my mind said that may not be coincidental.
Sure you're ready for tomorrow, mate?
Rob said, glancing over at me from the counter. Why, yeah, yep. I'm with good hands, coming with you.
Look, once we get up into the couloir, we ain't turning back, so there's no shame in having second thoughts.
No, it's not that. Yeah, I could come back another time, but who knows how long I'd have to wait. Life's hectic, you know? Might be years till I can try again.
Just making sure. Nerves are a dangerous beast up there. As long as you listen to me, you'll be fine. But remember, don't panic. If you're feeling anxious, remind yourself that getting upset won't help your situation.
Heat from the waning coal coddled my body. Only embers flickered by the time I began to nod off into a deep, dreamless sleep. We set off at 8 a.m. after having oatmeal and berries. The first few hours ended up being a tough trek along the snowfield skirting round toward the collier. Azure sky gazed down through the wispy high cirrus. We were about a mile from the gully when light snowfall started up. It wasn't hugely surprising, being on a mountain and all, but the sky remained clear. If anything, it had grown clearer over the past hour, and still the snow fell regardless. It was such a bizarre sight, I worried I might be getting altitude sickness. As icy pinpricks pelted my skin, the reality of the situation dawned on me. Visibility was dropping by the minute, and within 10, I could scarcely see Rob 20 feet ahead. And then he was gone. I don't mean his silhouette bled away into the whiteout. I mean even his footprints were entirely covered over. I called out to him in a panic, cupping my hands together in a futile attempt to pierce the howling gale. Hoping to catch sight of Rob, I plodded forward another 100 yards or so. Nothing. My next actions I still ruminate over today, forcing me to curse my own cowardice. Even if I was the one who disappeared, I didn't know that at the time. Without Rob to guide me, I thought I was surely going to die. So I turned back. Following the compass, I made a steady descent, hoping to get back to the hut faster than we'd come up. The fresh dusting of snow made frantic steps a danger, and I slipped several times. After an hour, my view was unchanged, pure whiteness. In my retreat, I'd somehow failed to notice a crucial detail. I wasn't going downhill. It seemed like I was in a flat snowfield, but when I turned a full 360 to get my bearings, I understood I was actually facing a gentle incline. A fresh wave of terror crashed down in my mind. I glanced down at my compass, and to my horror, saw the needle replaced by a listless spinning blur. I tried my best. Mom would have been proud, but the cold wore me down, the snow merciless as it pelted me. My footsteps grew closer and closer together until there were no footsteps at all. I crouched on one knee. I wasn't shivering anymore. Well, I did feel pretty warm, hot actually. I went to unzip my coat when a stark patch of lime caught my attention. An abandoned tent, long left to endure the elements. It looked old. My dulling mind didn't catch the oddity that it wasn't already buried by the snow. Our tent was in Rob's pack, and with him out of the picture, this was my only chance at survival. There were a few small tears in the canvas, but the tent sufficed in its primary purpose. Still, I had no means of warming myself up. Bundled tight in my sleeping bag, I felt the weight of exhaustion settle, and no sooner did my eyelids droop and my eyes rolled back. The fact I awoke at all filled me with a sense of relief. Brain still groggy, I sat up and observed the tent's interior. It fared well in the figurative flashbang of a snowstorm. Something was different. The small tears only looked out onto white, but all was quiet. Never has there been a silent blizzard. Only when a cold shock hit my foot did I notice the mounds of melting slush on the floor directly beneath each rip in the tent. I was snowed in. Adrenaline flooded my veins and sent my thoughts into hyperspeed. How long had I been buried? How much oxygen was left in the tent? How deep was I? Don't panic. Freaking out won't help. I took in a deep, controlled breath and crawled over to the zipper, hesitating before tugging it open in one swift motion. White fluff poured into the tent, and in a transitory state between dread and understanding, I scrambled backwards in fear of an icy casket. My mind cleared. Logically, if the snow was that powdery, I couldn't be down very deep. Still, the tent sagged, its backbone long since snapped. I dragged myself out and pushed my way through the dampening snow, lugging the pack with all my equipment behind. With the gap collapsing in on itself behind me, I planted my boots in the snow and stood. I wasn't on Monte Rosa. I wasn't in the Alps. I wasn't even on a mountain at all. Standing near the bottom of a sort of half-cone slope, the horizon-wide expanse of dark water was the first hint I was somewhere else entirely. I could tell the ocean was a ways down, but only after shuffling down to the edge did I catch a glimpse of the precipice. A rugged ice face plummeting some 400 feet. Vertigo struck suddenly, knocking me onto my ass, hands splayed like a starfish. Something sticking up near the edge caught my eye. It resembled the curve rails of a pool ladder. If said ladder was poorly made and rickety, with coarse gray rope tied to each side, graying fibers sequestered by an equally ashen backdrop. A tiny ray of hope beamed somewhere deep down inside of me. Maybe someone was here. I crawled through the powder and gripped the steel bars. My gloves did nothing against the inexorable chill of wind-beaten metal. Still, desperate curiosity willed my head and shoulders to lean over the precipice. Fixed into the mottled ice, a vertical tower of crude materials swayed in the ever-present winds. It reminded me of a shantytown with its hastily flattened planks and battered metal sheeting. For the life of me, I couldn't fathom what reason any sane person would have to build such a thing. Then again, I'd yet to find anything in this place I could fathom. "Hello?" I called out. The first words out of my mouth since waking up were hoarse and weak, tumbling pathetically down the mismatched scaffolding. There was an immediate response from somewhere below. I couldn't see anyone, but there were multiple voices, bleeding together into a garbled slur. Relief warped into regret as I remained hunched, frozen, as if I were some frost-caked gargoyle in a forgotten castle. Though my voice barely cut through the winds, I regretted opening my mouth. I didn't quite know why. The frantic shuddering on the platforms as someone clambered up to meet me instilled a deep, imminent foreboding. I somehow hadn't realized before, but the ropes tied around the bars I clasped onto were actually those of a rope ladder. They whipped into the cliffside, heralding the arrival of the figure who just pushed their way out from under a rotten blue tarp. A disheveled and wild-eyed man pulled his way up the wooden rungs, patchy bundles of matted hair swinging around his face. When he saw me, he paused, wired eyes suddenly morphing into something rabid before continuing up the ladder with fervor. As if dislocated, his jaw dropped wide open and flopped around on its hinges. I didn't know what that expression meant, but suffice to say, I was horrified. Those eyes, they betrayed hunger. I flopped onto my back and fumbled with the zipper on my bag, tearing out an ice pick and sleeting myself. 2 sets of blackening fingers curled over the rim before me, followed by this bestial visage of a human climbing up onto the snow in all his wiry might. Hey, what are you doing there, lad? I chuckled with transparent unease. He almost looked surprised after I spoke, as if language was a foreign concept to him. He sucked air in through his teeth with a hiss.
Cold, so hungry. You, warm, fresh.
He spat in a gravelly voice. I backed up, raising the ice pick clutched in both hands. The man went a few uncoordinated steps before lunging out of nowhere and diving on top of me. I yelped in fear, falling backwards and raising the pick horizontal in defense. Spittle sprayed from yellow teeth, gnashing inches from my face. Acting swiftly, I rammed the blunt handle of the pick into his throat, causing him to recoil. Only a second later, he persisted with all his rage, seeming to shrug off the blow to his jugular as though it were an insect bite. In the scuffle, he managed to grab my right arm and sunk his teeth into my wrist. I screamed and let go of the pick with my right. Instinctively, I swung it in my left, the sharp end sailing true and embedding directly into the side of his neck. Viscous blood exploded over my face as I wrenched the pick back towards me, tearing the front of his throat open in a ragged gash. The man shot up straight in response, stumbling uncontrolled back to the edge and dropping limply into the open air. Despite my close call, something else disturbed me. The blood that had poured onto me was cold. I don't mean lukewarm, cold, if not freezing. No steam rose into the air as one might expect. It just curdled and froze on my clothing. With no other choice, I crept back to the rope ladder and looked down. A ratty woman had just climbed up into view and paused after seeing the man's body on the platform.
Ugh, god damn it. Again, Kurt?
What she said took me aback, but the bubbling laugh from Kurt was the kicker. Throat practically non-existent, he was alive and laughing.
Hey, sorry about him. You can come down. It's safe.
I almost joined Kurt in his hysteria. It was such an absurd proposition. Safe? You're dangling off the edge of a cliff.
Let me rephrase. Safer. Trust me, you don't want to spend another minute up there.
What? Nah, screw this. I'm out of here.
Are you? Are you really? Take a look around. Where in the name of God do you think you are right now?
No idea, but even if my chances are 1 in a million at getting home, I'd rather die out there than stay here.
Me too, traveler. Me too.
With that, the conversation was over. The woman turned her attention to Kurt. I refused to witness any more of this madness and stormed off back up the slope I'd come from. After a few steady paces, I stopped dead in my tracks. Something was off. Imperceptible movement in the snowfield. Distant thuds growing nearer. I squinted to make anything out, but I didn't need to. There, near the buried tent I'd crawled out of, the falling snow outlined an absence. Empty air. A strong gust flung pale dustings off the ground to form a haze, and in it, the shape was clear. I couldn't tell you what it was, only what it resembled. Serpentine in form and of simply vast size, it coiled through the haze the way an air bubble darts through water. 2, maybe 3 sparsely spaced legs jabbed out of the ground, leaving clear imprints of whatever this thing was. Scythe-like mandibles sliced through the air towards me. It wasn't a hallucination. I could hear its sharp limbs clacking, feel its heavy steps through the ground. I reneged on my words and scampered back down the ladder. Vertigo be damned, I couldn't stand up against whatever the hell that thing was. The girl was still tending to the man whose throat I'd torn out and shot a glance over to me.
Told you,
she said with an ill-fitting smile. What the hell is that? I couldn't see it. Well, I could, but...
It's fine. They won't come down here.
I sank to the floor, if it could even be called that, and a sudden wave of despair overtook me. I hadn't the first clue where I was. Something deep in the recesses of my mind doubted I was even on Earth anymore.
I'm Eleanor, by the way.
Shaking, I looked over to her with a grimace, then promptly winced from the pain of freezing wind whistling through my teeth. Nicholas, how are you so nonchalant right now? How long have you been here in this hell?
How long? Hell if I know. Time doesn't have a say anymore. Not for me. It's not as if clocks work here, even if I wanted to know the time. A day could be months, years, and a night could be 5 minutes, or vice versa.
There's not many things a man can do when faced with impossibility. Do you deny, to enkindle self-detriment, or accept and give up so easily? A question of hopeless fight versus hopeless submission.
Look, how about you come down with us, get some shelter? I know it's not optimal, but believe me when I say it's a paradise to living up there.
Before, I had Rob to guide me. Whether he's still in the world I knew or he's here somewhere, I don't know. I should hope he made it out, but the coward in me also hopes to see him in this cursed place, to let him take the lead, and the same cowardice in me chose to stay with Eleanor, Kurt, and the rest. The rope ladder ran down through entry level. A group of us sat on a 9-foot square base of cobbled ply and sheet metal, enclosed by flapping rolls of sun-bleached canvas and tarp. A room by some sliver of a margin. At the time, there were 6 of us. A paler, sharp-faced man introduced himself as Aaron and spoke on behalf of Kurt. The hunger, you see, it breaks you down. However strong you think you are, you'll never win against it. To eat anything substantial is a godsend, let alone something warm. Of the remaining 2 were Naya, a tan woman whose dappled skin displayed mild vertigo, and an older gentleman bearing several tight pink scars over his hands. Same for his face. Well, what could be seen of it past a graying beard. He doesn't remember his name. Everyone calls him Iago or Santiago. Something Hemingway. Never read his books myself, but as far as wind-beaten fishermen go, Iago certainly looks the part. It took a while of idle chatter for me to finally come around to the question seeping through my thoughts. So, how do you survive here? 8 words were all it took to derail the conversation and have them exchanged pitied glances.
Ain't a matter of surviving, son,
Iago rasped.
It's a choice between lesser evils.
I was exacerbated. What does that even mean, you old... Iago's sunken eyes toppled my will, and I trailed off. He huffed, more with fatigue than frustration.
Try as you might, it can't die in this place.
I went to bite back, but swallowed my words as I remembered Kurt. He laid beside us under a dirty sheet. Naya must have caught on because she reached over and tugged the fabric down to reveal Kurt's injury. Now his ruined throat was filled with what looked to be ice, only the ice looked tainted, putrid almost, with sallow mycelia exploding within. Crimson tributaries forced their way through the frost, up on the left, down on the right. Tingling dread crept in a similar manner, up my spine and neck, and flowing back down through my chest. If this was reality now, then, well, I don't know. What moral is there? What sadistic law of nature permits this? With no other choice, I've learned quickly what to do and what to avoid, either empirically alongside my fellow captives or from their lessons. Actually, just whenever we need to, We set out in the snowfield above in alternating groups of 2 or 3. Oftentimes, the invisible creatures moved to someplace new, leaving the path clear for us. I'd let them use my ice picks, though. I'd made it clear that if it was my turn, I'd always have one in hand. The third member used some kind of socket wrench with a sharp stone driven into the end. The iceberg is possibly the most treacherous ground I've ever had to traverse. Fissures hide under deceptive snow overhangs. One misstep on such unstable ground means falling 100 feet into an icy casket. That wouldn't be so bad, since you could eventually climb your way out. Only the boar worms that tunnel deep inside the ice are quick to snatch up anything coming their way. Worse still, those see-through monsters come and go as they please. I myself have been caught, 8 odd times? The way their mandibles carve and cleave, they must be serrated, because it hurts. It really hurts. And I'd rather not experience the sensation again. But we have to go searching. We have to. Most of the time we find little, usually nothing. A beaten metal sheet or frost-blackened planks are cause for celebration. You see, our cliff dwelling doesn't stay by itself. If only it were that easy. No, the iceberg is sinking constantly at a glacial rate into the abyssal brine below. Perpetual snowfall packs itself down into the ice over time and roughly maintains the iceberg's elevation. So we have to deconstruct, dismember the lower levels and lug them back up to the top. Drive old rebar into the cliff with blunt objects and fasten everything back together. If that's not work enough, the whole iceberg sways imperceptibly over time. It tilts forward to precarious angles, resting for a drawn-out solstice before tipping backwards again. Lose your presence of mind, and there's no second chance. Down into the freezing waters you go, torn apart by scaled monsters with their jagged spines and shark's teeth. Never blessed with the mercy of death until every cell in your violated body is torn and strewn asunder. Of course, there's a respite when the iceberg leans backward. It's not something to get complacent with. Listen to that nagging reminder tell you that at some point, you'll be back in the same spot. That's your survival instinct talking, obsolete as it is. And even then, when you feel prepared for anything, this place always has an ace up its sleeve. My first introduction to this concept was, it was a while after my arrival. I'd like to embellish the memory, to say we were sitting around a fire, something to that effect. No chance of that. Even behind cover from the wind, it's like the warped physical laws here outright forbid sparks and flames. No, I sat beside Aaron and Naya on a pile of salt-crusted clothes. Without much else to pass the time, we'd engage in half-hearted games and hobbies. Contrary to his appearance, Iago had a strong singing voice. I'm kind of amazed he can remember any songs. The man can't recall his own name for Pete's sake. I guess it's like Alzheimer's. Music's the last to flee memory, or so I've heard. At the time, he stood out on the platform before us. He was singing. I think it was Green, Green Grass of Home. In spite of the choppy gale, his voice carried. It was pleasant. This song in particular rang with poignant nostalgia. Once Iago finished, he stood with his hands held together. Hey, pretty good, old man. Aaron cheered. Naya nodded her head in agreement. Iago chuckled, and for a fleeting moment, our troubles were lost. I guess we were too distracted to hear the heavy shuffling from below, because we fell back to silence when an enormous hand wrapped around the edge of the platform. Whatever pulled itself over that edge, it was no creation of a sane god. Gray, blubbery flesh rippled in the wind. A disgusting, bloated thing the size of a tractor tire peered over at us. A head. Scattered perforations in its side must have been ears, but it had no facial features other than a burbling, X-shaped hole right in the middle. 3 more sets of hands clambered their way up to us, somehow crawling up the ice as if it were a gecko. None of these details held a candle to what their overall features resembled. Infants. Elephant-sized hellspawn toddlers crawling on all fours. Laggardly with age, Iago had no chance. Swollen, sticky fingers curled around his body, squeezing him in a grasp even world record strongmen couldn't escape. The awful harmony they made upon claiming their new plaything is etched into my soul. gargling coos of childlike elation, deep in pitch and easily drowning out Yago's hysterics. In the brief period before they left, I watched, oblivious to the screams of Naya and Aaron. As the creature shook him around and pulled at his limbs, all I could hear were joints and bones snapping, cracking. The creature holding Yago brought him up to the dribbling hole on its face. The hole dilated, revealing a cavernous passage of dripping flesh, and, with slowness I'm sure was intentional, pushed Yago inside, feet first up to his neck. It closed around him with such pressure I could hear his body breaking, and with crushed lungs he couldn't even scream. And just like that, they descended, leaving us with a cold, empty space shaped like an old man. That's how it goes here. No mercy, just suffering. Endless, indiscriminate suffering. These are a handful of things we can predict, or at the very least, expect. It may be logical to melt the ice and drink it. We are, after all, still subject to thirst and hunger, despite needing no food or water to live. Fresh snow from up above is okay, but the ice is bad water. It's rotten. It putrefies and becomes teeming with disease. In particular, it hosts some kind of parasite. Drink it and they'll start breeding inside you until your organs are rife with them. They sap any moisture they can from your body, drying you into a shriveled husk. Oh, and they're permanent. Literally no way of getting them out. I mentioned boar worms before. They're not an issue most of the time. Sometimes, if you look deep into the ice cliff, you can see them burrowing within. They're lightning fast though, so I can never get a clear picture of them. From what I can gather, they're long, thick, and leech-like. Their heads open up to reveal strangely mechanical sets of spike balls which spin against each other to grind through the ice. I don't know if they're immune to the parasites. Maybe they're symbiotic. Worm eat ice, parasite take water, who knows? This nameless hell has fates of plenty, except one: death. I didn't know how it worked at first, but it later on became clear. Months, perhaps years after Yago's abduction, something happened that was gut-wrenching and incredible in equal measure. About 25 feet from us, the ice began growing outwards. A small mound at first, swelling like rotten pustules. It was when a familiar visage began forming that it clicked, and we built a walkway across. Through some uncouth law of nature, Yago grew in the form of an ice sculpture. Then color flushed his skin, starting at his fingertips and slowly spreading. He eventually broke free with a crack and a pop and fell down into our arms, vacant-eyed and nude. A grotesque and wholly unnatural birth. Yago was never the same after that. Deference held our tongues from prying, until the curiosity got too much to bear. Even when he prodded him, asked him what had happened, not one inchoate word slipped from his lips. I shudder to think about what might have happened during his absence at the hands of those abominations. Things that considered him nothing more than a toy to wear out. We've taken to calling them blubbers. I'd say it describes them to a T. With a honed skill at hiding, they're not too hard to avoid. The problem is hearing them approach before they arrive, because if you don't, well, no need to repeat what's already been said. Past that, a worse revelation came to light. No matter what we do, no matter what happens to us, no matter how violent or peaceful the death, we'll return, spat right back out into the fray every time, no matter what. The brutality displayed in this realm is nothing to be scoffed at, but at the very least, you grow accustomed. Meat and bone lose their sting, and yet there are some things the scars can't toughen you against. One in particular stands out to me. Kurt and I were out on a scouting trip. We'd long since made amends by this time and agreed to let bygones be just that. Plodding along the ridge of a snow dune, Kurt cocked his head to look at something, then grabbed my shoulder with a wary firmness.
Get down. Now.
We both dropped down below cover. I hadn't seen anything, but by now I trusted Kurt's judgment. What? What do you see?
Caught it in the corner of my eye. Thank fuck I ain't look at it.
Without thinking, I went to peek over into the open snowfield. Kurt tore me back by the scruff of my jacket, bringing me to eye level.
The hell you doing, you fucking oaf? Don't look at it.
I stared, confused. At what?
The uncoupled. Should really get Ellie to go over.
Whoa, slow down. Uncoupled?
Yeah. Don't look too deep into the name. I only seen it in the corner of my vision before. Just a dark shape. Nah, more than that. A stain. A stain on the world.
Carefully, I turned my head in the direction he'd seen it, as if I'd be able to see right through the snow. Okay, if you can't look at it, how do you know?
Been plenty here before you, mate. Knew one or two of them. This kid called, Kent, yeah. He looked. Said it was hollow. Sort of an empty imprint that might have once been a person. I think he said something along the lines of, it's like if you took someone and stripped everything away except their being. Still not sure what he really meant. But it's enough to know I ain't never gonna look at it. Well, that and the fact that a moment later, he's already 30 feet ahead and stumbling toward it.
Pausing to let Kurt's words sink in, I muttered, "Where is he now? I mean, Iago got taken and he came back." He shook his head, eyes focused on nothing.
Couldn't tell you. Only way I even remember him is because of his voice. Screams. God-awful wailing. Surfing across the dunes and through the air. In those short times when the wind stumbles, if you just listen.
Following his lead, I cocked an ear upward, frostbitten air slicing past my skin. There was nothing other than the howling gale and the hammering of my heart. However, the longer I listened, I picked up on something distinct from the wind whistling. It did sound like screams. For all I know, Kurt could have just been pulling a sick prank. It's easy to hear things that aren't there, to see what you want to see. Only, as I focused, it began to morph into the tone and timbre of a scream I still remembered. One I remembered well. It was the last voice I'd heard before this all happened. I tried not to think about it. "Help me." The words were hissed straight into my ear. It startled me so bad my legs straightened and I hopped off the ground. No question that time, it was his voice. After that, it wasn't a matter of not thinking about it, but of trying to forget. I must have been in a trance when Kurt spoke up again, snapping his fingers.
"Hey, you alright? Come on, we should get back. Ain't seen nothing out there worth the risk. Just, if you ever see something in the corner of your eye, something darker than dark, leave."
I nodded, grimacing, and we made our way back to our home. If constant, freezing snowfall wasn't enough, the weather knows worse cruelty. For the most part, we have shelter if it starts raining anything untoward. If you're caught out in the snowfield, though, well, let's say you'll be back in a few weeks at best, months or years at worst. That happened one time while Eleanor and Aaron went scavenging. They must have been on their way back when it started raining these razor-sharp ice shards, finger-sized blades that sliced through the canvas and embedded deep into wooden platforms. Pain snarls from above heralded Aaron's arrival, the rope ladder quivering under his descent. The best way I can describe how he looked was as if a shrapnel grenade had detonated 3 feet in front of him. Well, all around him, really. Deep, weeping gashes littered his body, and strands of flayed skin danced in the wind. It was like looking at a mangled, human-shaped version of those cheese strings. You know, the ones you peel off? I wish I could taste one of those again. Anyway, there wasn't much more we could do except bandage him up. Even then, it was more so we didn't have to see his injuries. I realized in my stupidity something we'd overlooked. He was alone. Naya asked where she was. He sat there, lifeless. It could have been the bandages wrapped around his head. I think he was just too broken to register the question. With his throat and chest a pulpy mess, Aaron's voice was little more than a grating rattle. "Didn't make it. Ankles, Achilles, all sliced to shit. She fell down a ravine." Naya just stood there, letting her head loll back, and let out a forlorn wail into the sky. One of transparent despair and indignance at this reprobate world. One I felt all too closely. I remembered looking into the ice and seeing torn flesh dangling from a boreworm's mouth, Dull pink smudges carried through the ice as they tunneled. A while later, 2 or 3 weeks at a guess, her rebirth began. It seems that whenever this happens, they aren't too far away, 30 feet tops. I don't want to jinx it, maybe it's luck. More likely, it's just how this place works. I dream sometimes of being reborn from the ice, only to fall out rigid and lifeless. But all we get are failed miscarriages. There's one thing I find worthy of putting on paper, and that is the storm. It happens at random, according to Kurt. There's no pattern to its visits. I've only witnessed it twice in my time here. The first time it swirled on the distant skyline, I found myself totally wrapped in its magnificence, a terrifying sight to behold. We'd been imprisoned in a night that must have lasted at least 2 or 3 years, relatively speaking. And in accordance with the darkness, the only light being the bruised, moonless firmament, it took a while for the black clouds to register, congealing across the waters. Well, it wasn't hard to notice after deep crimson flashes lit up in its bowels. Pulsating vermilion glimmers, so full of energy that I could feel heat wash over my face from across the waters. That heat grew into a roiling whirlwind as the storm neared. The others were quick to stir from their meager shut-eye when they too felt it.
The hell's that?
Oh no, please God, not again, Aaron croaked. Guys, what's happening? What is that out there? I asked.
Storm's coming,
Yago said. We all turned to him in sync. Those were the only words he'd spoken since he returned from the blubbers. And the mere sound of his voice came as a shock. We pressed for details, but he'd already sunken back into his dead-tongued dejection. Kurt was no help either. He just shivered and stared paralytic into the churning depths of that stormhead. I'll be honest, after the storm drew nearer and patting rain replaced the snow, a certain excitement overtook me. Inky blots darted across the flashing lights deep in the storm clouds, captivating me in awe. I threw my head back and opened my mouth, allowing the rain to splash its warmth across my tongue. It felt heavenly. The sensation of warmth after so long deprived was like nothing I'd felt before. The euphoria was short-lasting, and concern replaced it as the raindrops turned scalding. When they started to burn and sizzle off my face, I flinched and dove back under the cover. Before long, the air was an all-encompassing haze of steam. It was like we'd entered some malfunctioning steam room. Each breath brought with it a flaring heat that spread from my lungs to the rest of my organs. It's funny, isn't it? In winter, it's cold and dreary, and you wish it was summer instead. Then when summer rolls around, the beating sun and stifling nights make you yearn for the colder seasons. In that boiling cloud, I begged for the cold to come back. At least we could layer up in the coats and pants. There was nothing to be done about the heat. You can't exactly take your skin off when it's too hot. Momentary relief came as cool, trickling streams from above. My relief was sorely misguided when I understood what it was. Meltwater. Minor runnels quickly inflated to a formidable downpour, then into a violent rapid. Nothing could be heard over the roar of rushing water. Blind, breathless, and panicking, I reached out for a hold. My fingers wrapped around metal, a pole driven into the ice. I held on with everything I had, but there was a thump beside me, a gurgled shriek. Eleanor. Despite my total exertion to keep from being swept away, I outstretched a hand. "Ellie, grab my hand!" I said, a candle in the wind to the rapids. Without delay, I felt her slippery fingers intertwine with my own. I heaved. I felt as if my spine would snap right there and then. I didn't have the strength. The cold torrent sapped all of the excess energy from my muscles.
Help me!
Following the cry, I barely made out Kurt clinging helplessly to a torn canvas. The steam swallowed him up again, and my stomach knotted when a harsh tearing noise scraped my eardrums. In total, uncut despair, I watched as Kurt plummeted past the platform and out of sight. As if on cue, Ellie's fingers slipped away. My heart felt as empty as my palm. Her screams faded from my ears, replaced by the incessant torrent. I don't remember the wait following. Only the waterfall suddenly abating, giving way to a familiar gray murk hanging in the sky. Kurt and Eleanor were gone. In any other situation, I might have found solace knowing they drowned, or perhaps even died on impact with the ocean. Of course, that was out of the question. We were left knowing with absolute certainty they were going through unimaginable suffering, and far more to come. Whether at the hands of unseen leviathans, blubbers, or any other nameless thing lurking in the depths, it didn't matter. I just hoped whatever found them was vicious enough to tear them apart, digest their bodies into nothing, and allow them to return. A week passed, and Eleanor began to regrow. Another 2 weeks later, Kurt appeared. After their rebirth, we all knew better than to prod. Just leave them be. Let them process it. Let them decompress. Loss may seem a trivial affliction without death, but I would be naive to think of loss as a purely physical separation. Yes, you may be taken away, put through unspeakable suffering, and then be reborn, but for lack of a better term, those victims lose some integral part of their being, slowly chipped and whittled away. Something so abstract, so important, yet it cannot be grasped by the hand. Once it's gone, there's no reeling it back. And still, we went on. We had no choice, and fell back on mindless habits for comfort. In a way, we found paltry success in learning what makes this place tick. Trial and error. However awful those trials have been. My thoughts lingered on the storm after it happened a second time. We were seasoned, prepared for what was to come, making sure our cover was uninfiltrated by the elements. We pulled together ropes and twine, tied them around ourselves, and fastened the ends to various driven poles and stakes. Maybe I'd been too focused on the storm and its sizzling droplets to catch Iago unfastening himself and standing up. A yell from Aaron brought me to attention, but it was too late. Iago, already several paces away, lumbered toward the edge of the platform. We all thought he'd jump, futile as it be. He didn't. Instead, he threw off his shoes, socks, jacket, and pants, everything, until he stood stark naked, exposed to the elements. At this point, we knew better than jumping up to help. We had no fault in this. He'd come back eventually, after all. Yet I could sense something changing. I don't know what or when it started, but it was there. A shift, a redirection of energy. Iago howled as his skin bubbled and blistered under the storm's ferocity. I think it was when his skin began sloughing off in great swaths that it happened. Without warning, Iago's entire being burst into a furious red flame, a sparking vermilion plasma crackling with the intensity of lightning. Eyes watering from the heat, I watched transfixed as his silhouette, shrouded in hellfire, seemed to be eaten away into nothing. Not a puff of smoke or steam bellowed from him. His backlit shadow disintegrated inch by inch until the last smattering of fragments were burned away entirely. Absolutely nothing remained of Iago once the storm passed. Not one stray hair or nail fragment. Of course, we expected him to grow out from the ice face, right away in fact. Nothing happened. We scanned every last inch of the cliff. Nothing. It's been... hell, I can't even guess how long it's been since then. It's all so damn arbitrary. Meaningless. Could be decades, centuries, millennia. My family might be long dead by now. Hell, humanity could have already gone extinct. And in all that time, I've yet to see a hint of Iago's return. Maybe he's in another worse place. Maybe he's dead. Or maybe he made it back home. Those are the only possibilities I can imagine. And as far as I can see, that's a 2 out of 3 chance of escaping this place. Escaping eternity. Next time the storm comes around, I think I'll follow that old man's example. Stripped down to my most human form, raw for the whole world to see. And maybe, just maybe, the rain will set me free. When I was 26, my friend and I decided we were going to sail around the world. Ambitious? Yes. Stupid? Yes. As I record this, I am 3.5 years into this journey, with an estimated 2 weeks until I reach home base. I'm not sure if I'll make it. I'll sum up my life story thus far in 3 short sentences. I was lucky to have a nice family growing up, and we lived by the water and loved to sail. After college, I realized I wasn't very happy with myself and needed direction. I thought I'd find answers on the open water, or something like that, so me and my best friend set sail. Samuel and I had saved up a lot of money ever since we were teenagers. We bought a yacht together, aka a tattered 35-foot boat that was built in the 1960s with a nice motor and huge sails. It took some work to get it going again, but it was worth every penny. We had plenty of food, clean water, water purifiers, medicine, flare guns, solar generators, batteries, a professional GPS, all the essentials. We also have a nice satellite thingy that Sam set up so we can have Wi-Fi on board. It only works about 10% of the time, truth be told, but if you're hearing this, it means it's done its job. The past 3.5 years have been, interesting. Some weird stuff has happened, but I don't have time to go over it all right now. The only thing of importance now is surviving the situation I'm in and creating this recorded record of what happened. It started a couple hours ago. Like I said, I'm about 2 weeks away from California, where we started our journey going north away from Mexico into the Pacific Ocean. A few hours ago, Sam and I were sitting out on the boat's deck, sipping some champagne, celebrating the fact that we were in the home stretch. The stars, my God, the stars were beautiful. You really can't get a better view of them than from the middle of the ocean. We were quietly admiring them. We had talked so much in the past 3 years, but the silent moments we shared were the ones I remembered most. Like that moment we were in, silently watching the stars at night and drinking champagne. Or the first morning we set sail. We didn't talk for almost 2 hours as we watched the sunrise, as it first appeared as a red blob climbing over the ocean's end. Sam was strumming "Here Comes the Sun" on his guitar. The salty wind was hitting our face, and I thought, this is it. No coming back. This is the beginning of this whole journey. I thought about these moments and more like them, but I was broken from my daze as I noticed Sam had stood up from his seat rather quickly and was staring off into the dark horizon. "What is it?" I asked. "I thought I saw a flare." I looked out in the same direction he was and waited. A couple of seconds passed, then a skinny, barely visible streak of red appeared. It was a couple of miles away, maybe more. Sam turned to me. "A flare?" I nodded. "A flare. Let's go, now." "Got it." I ran to the controls and started up the engine. We turned the vessel sharply and darted over in the direction it came from. We were traveling fast for sure, but not at an unsafe speed. Our boat rocked up and down and side to side as we traversed the rough waves. Sam and I probably sailed for 10 minutes or so without seeing any more flares and no sign of any other vessels in front of us. "Should we keep going?" Sam asked. Just a little longer, I think." So we did. But this is where things took a turn. No, not a turn. A turn implies the driver is still on the road. No, things didn't take a turn. Things dove off a cliff. "Whoa, slow down!" Sam yelled at me. I slowed down significantly. "What is it?" I see something. I'm not sure yet. Can't make it out." We continued at a slow, steady speed, keeping an eye out. I could see what he saw soon after he pointed it out, but I couldn't make it out. A buoy, maybe? Some scrap from a ship? We approached closer. Wait, no, it's too skinny. Except on top, it's a sign. It's a stop sign. Sam muttered. It was about 10 feet higher than the water's surface. It stood perfectly still as the waves crashed around it. The octagon was red and weathered and covered with rust, but the white letters reading "stop" in the middle were unmistakable. How is it not moving? It was almost as if its pole was stuck into the ocean's floor hundreds of feet below us. "What the hell?" I said. I don't know, man. Let's turn around."
I agreed because I didn't like whatever vibe a stop sign in the middle of the ocean was giving off. We turned and passed by the sign once more and sailed away. We were silent again, but not like before when we were sipping champagne. We weren't thoughtful, reflecting, or anything like that. We were scared. I could tell he was. I was, but why? It's just a stop sign, right? Nothing spooky about that. Just weird, just odd, out of place. We continued on for a while, not speaking, until I made a remark about the water. Wow, the water has really calmed down. These waves are baby waves. Seriously, Sam confirmed. This is the quietest the water's been in months, maybe years. He was right, but a chill crept up my neck when I realized how quiet it really was. It wasn't just quiet, it was growing quieter by the second. 20 minutes before, the waves were roaring and crashing into our boat, but they had weakened to small splashes, then had diminished into the faintest sounds of water moving, like a small creek, but then it was silent. There were no ocean sounds at all. If any of you have been out on the ocean in the middle of the night, you know how dark the water really is. It's basically black. The only definition of the waves comes from the moonlight, and you can faintly make out where the waves break and crash. Well, as the sound diminished, so did the waves. The choppy black water had grown stiller and stiller and stiller, and now it was still. It was black. It was flat. It looked like there was no ocean. There was no reflection from the moon or stars anymore. There was nothing beneath our boat but darkness. Sam turned to me. He didn't have words, but his petrified expression confirmed that I wasn't going crazy. We both moved towards the side of the boat's deck and looked down where the water should be. Looking straight down was an odd experience. You know when you look up in the sky and your eyes go for the furthest possible focal point they can? Well, this seemed to go beyond that point. There was nothing but darkness, and I couldn't find an end to it. Sam grabbed my arm. "What is this? What's happening?" "I'm not sure." I turned to him, but then I noticed something far worse. He was no longer backlit by the moon. There were no stars behind his darkened figure. The only light came from our boat's lamps. There were no stars, there was no moon, there was no water. There was only us and our vessel. There was nothing beneath us and nothing above us. The ship no longer rocked back and forth with the water's current. It was perfectly still, absolutely motionless. We floated somewhere in space and time, I know that much, but I had lost all direction. I felt like I was losing my sanity too. I had an odd, out-of-body experience then. It was like I was a mile away from where I stood. I could see the small light emitting from the boat far off in the distance, and surrounding us was nothing but darkness. It looked like we were floating somewhere in outer space, a part of the universe void of any stars or light. I came back from that vision and gained some composure. What does the GPS say?" I asked. Sam ran over to the navigation system's display. "It says..." His eyes were locked on the screen. He didn't finish the sentence. What does it say?" "It says..." He paused again without looking up at me. "It doesn't know where we are." "That's impossible. You said the GPS works everywhere." "Everywhere on Earth, yeah." That gave me pause. "What are you saying?" He still looked at the screen. He ignored my question and asked one of his own. I'll never forget his words. "Does it feel like we're falling to you?" "No," I started to say, but after he asked that, it did. Kind of. Before, it felt like we were floating on stagnant water in complete darkness, but now, I felt that drop in my stomach. My heart was beating faster. It felt like I was lighter, like my feet were barely putting any weight on the deck's surface, like the boat was about to fall away and leave me behind, floating by myself in the dark. No, I reconfirmed, though I wasn't sure what I really believed. It could have been my imagination. I didn't want to accept the fact that we were falling. Falling into what? No, I said a third time. We aren't falling, it's just dark. It's messing with your senses. We looked off in the same direction, first towards where the horizon would have been, then down to where the water should have been, then up at the starless sky. We had nowhere to go. I was unsure if the motor would work or if the sails would be of any use. There was no wind, and I was sure there was no water. We were sailing on an ocean of emptiness. What came next was something I'd never experienced before, so I may have trouble explaining. That feeling that we were falling was gone. It had been replaced by a feeling that we were upside down. I don't really know how to describe it. At first, we were upright, not falling anymore, but then we were turning. No, flipping. It felt like the whole boat was capsizing. It kept turning over and then stopped once it felt like we were perfectly upside down. It was still completely dark. There had been no change in scenery to indicate we had turned upside down. Nothing on the boat shifted at all. It was just a feeling. Like in outer space, there's no real up or down, but I'm sure an astronaut would be able to feel if they had been turned upside down. And I could tell Sam felt it too. He turned to me with eyes wider than I'd ever seen them. We didn't say a word to each other. Our locked eye contact was broken by light above us. It slowly appeared, but it was obvious that it was stars. It was the stars and moon in the sky once again. Oh, thank Christ, I said. But as Sam and I looked upward, I realized we weren't actually looking at the sky. We were looking at a reflection of the sky. It had a slow, rhythmic motion refracting the light in a strange way. Then I realized we were looking at water. I looked overboard and saw that beneath us was the night sky, beautiful and bright now, unmoving, and above us was the ocean, daunting and dark but reflecting every star off its surface. We were upside down, or we were still upright and everything else had flipped. I turned to Sam, whose expression matched my own, one of shock and confusion, but the word confusion doesn't do the situation justice. It was beyond my ability of comprehending something as a human. He looked at me. His expression had turned to sorrow. He looked like he was about to burst into tears that second. "Help!" he whimpered. And with that one word, I watched my friend fly upward, flail and scream for 10 agonizing seconds, and then splash into the dark ocean above my head. He fell, I thought. He fell up or down into the sea. But I didn't fall. I looked up at the now rough waves and waited for my fate to be sealed, but nothing happened. Not yet. I ran into the cabin and began recording this. I'd come to the conclusion that I was going to die somehow, and soon. I wanted my experience to be recorded for someone to hear, so someone knew what happened to me. I got about halfway through it before I heard the noise. It was a long, slow, loud, deep rumble. It almost felt like a light earthquake. It slowly got louder and louder until I couldn't ignore the fact that something was happening. I peeked outside the cabin door, cautious not to go all the way outside. I looked up at the ocean where I deduced the sound was coming from. The waves were bigger now, rougher too. Those black monsters would crash into one another and produce a light shower of white water. That's when I noticed it's closer. It was, indeed. The water was maybe 1,000 feet above the boat when I first noticed it. Now it was more like 250, and that distance was decreasing fast. I stared at it, stuck in a panic of confusion and fright. It was falling on me, or I was falling on it, and it was happening rapidly. I ran into the cabin again for shelter, knowing it would be little help. Seconds after I secured the cabin door, the ocean fell onto me, or I fell into it. The surface of the water crashed down hard onto the ship's deck and quickly began flooding the cabin. I think the boat was fully submerged underwater for a second at least. I felt the pull from it as it brought itself back to the surface, trying to float. I don't know how or why, but I knew I was upright after that. I'm not sure if the boat flipped itself or maybe a wave helped flip it over. It all happened so fast. I don't know, but I knew I was upright then, floating in the ocean. I got beat up pretty bad. Whiplash, bruises, a couple cuts, maybe a concussion. My boat got beat up worse, though. There was about a foot of standing water on the deck. The engine is completely wrecked, possibly beyond repair. The sails were torn to shreds from the impact of the water, but I'm floating upright. that's good. But I'm floating, wandering with no control over my direction. That's bad. And that's where I am now. I'm not sure what happened or what went wrong. I'm not sure if I'll ever make it home. I'm not sure if anyone will ever actually hear this. My GPS isn't working anymore. God knows where I am. I'm just hoping this internet thing Sam set up still works. God rest his soul. All I can do now is send up a couple flares and hope someone rescues me. It's still so dark. I had a strange experience as a young boy that gave me a lot of anxiety during my childhood. While I grew up, it was my go-to story at camp when we sat around the fire, but in my teenage years, and with the help from my therapist, I came to the conclusion that the story hadn't really happened. I convinced myself that I had constructed the memory based on my earliest nightmares, or perhaps some story told to me before I was old enough to tell fiction from reality. It was a reasonable way to see it. The fact is that you can't really trust your childhood memories, and given how unbelievable this particular memory was, it would have been absurd to still believe in it as an adult. So I stopped thinking about the memory, stopped telling it to my friends, and continued on with my life. At least that was until last week when I was visiting my mother. I found something in her attic, and now I feel compelled to tell my story once again. I was 7 years old. At the time, I lived with my mother in Stockholm. I didn't have any friends, not because I was disliked by my peers, but because there weren't any kids my age in the neighborhood. The other kids were either too young or too old for me. Thus, I usually played by myself in the courtyard. I didn't mind it that much. I had a rich imagination and could entertain myself pretty easily. My mother kept an eye on me through the kitchen window, but it was a safe neighborhood, so she didn't need to worry too much. It wasn't possible to enter the courtyard from the street without a code to the door, and my mother knew the neighbors well enough to trust them. One day, on my way down the staircase, I noticed a blue tricycle in the courtyard. I saw it from the window on the second floor. I hadn't seen it before and thought it would be cool to try it out. However, when I reached the courtyard, I couldn't find it anywhere. I assumed someone must have taken it away, although it would have to have happened really quickly because I had run down the staircase as fast as I could. Disappointed, I decided to climb one of the maple trees, and I quickly forgot about the tricycle. The next day, the same thing happened. I saw the tricycle from the window on the second floor, and when I got to the courtyard, it was gone. I don't remember if it happened a third time before I investigated it, but when I did, I was bewildered to discover that the tricycle could still be seen from the window on the second floor, and only from the window on the second floor. The view from that window was slightly different from the view from the other windows. The tricycle was the biggest difference, but there were other things that stood out too. For example, the bushes weren't as neatly trimmed, and there were cracks on the wall of the house facing the courtyard. Like with most things, I kept this mystery for myself. It was my discovery, a window to my own secret world. At least, that was how I felt. Every time I went outside to play, I took a few moments staring out the window on my way down. One time, a neighbor found me looking out of it. She asked what I was looking at, unable to notice the small differences that had caught my eye. I guess her adult mind simply couldn't find a reason to pay the view from the second floor any special attention. No one did, except me. I told her that I was looking at the birds, even though I didn't see any birds. In fact, I hadn't seen a single living thing on the other side of this window. It didn't register that might have been a bad sign. Instead, I thought it made my secret little world peaceful. I loved to be alone, and the world with the blue tricycle seemed to be the perfect place for it. I don't know how many days passed, but at some point, my curiosity got the best of me. It was October, or at least sometime during autumn, because I remember the yellow leaves on the maple trees. I snuck out of the apartment before my mother woke up. It was right after dawn. I climbed up the window frame in the staircase. A light rain fell over the courtyard, at least over this version of it. The second floor wasn't that high up, but it was still too high up for me to jump out of without hurting myself. Luckily, the window lay just next to the downpipe of the rain gutter, which I could use to climb down. I was a good climber. My mother always tells me I learned to climb before I learned to walk, so it didn't scare me. I still had to gather a lot of courage, though. I usually followed the rules to stay out of trouble, and this was perhaps the first time I did something that I knew my mother would have disapproved of. My hands trembled a little when I opened the window. I have a vague memory of the air smelling strange, toxic in some way. Every time I smell burnt rubber, this memory comes back to me, so I guess it smelled a bit like that. It didn't deter me, however. I grabbed the pipe, feeling my little heart beating hard in my chest, and began my descent. The sound of my feet hitting the ground echoed between the buildings. Looking up at them, the dark windows stared down at me like empty eye sockets.
Hello?
I yelled and listened to my echo. I wanted to know if I was truly alone, and since no one yelled back, I assumed that I was. This place was truly just as empty as I had hoped, but it wasn't as peaceful. The smell made me nauseous. The rain left black dirt on my skin, and the raindrops that landed on my lips left a bitter taste in my mouth. Looking up, I noticed a couple of high-level clouds tainted with a yellow color. I still felt safe, protected from the rest of the city by the buildings that surrounded me, but I still didn't want to stay for long. It wasn't just the smell, it was an overall feeling of something being wrong. I walked to the other end of the courtyard. On one of the walls that I hadn't been able to see from the window, I saw some graffiti. Close the doors. I might be remembering the exact phrase wrong, but I'm sure it said something like that. There was a heap of clothes lying next to the wall. I thought they must have belonged to someone. There had been people here once, I thought. Where did they all go? This question terrified me. I really wanted to try out the tricycle, but after seeing those clothes, I decided against it. It was time to go home. On my way back, I noticed something shiny hidden under the rotten leaves on the ground. I bent down and picked it up. It was a golden ball, the size of an apple. Fascinated, I stared at it. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I almost forgot about where I was, but just moments later, a sound of something crashing to the ground came from behind the building, somewhere on the street. I froze with fear. Something living was moving around on the street behind the building. It made a noise that sounded like a cooing of a pigeon, but much deeper. Another crash. It was the gate to my apartment building, the one leading directly to the courtyard through a tunnel. I stood at the wrong side of the entrance and didn't dare to run past it. The cooing echoed inside the tunnel. Something was slithering its way through it. It sounded like someone was dragging a huge sack on the ground. I hid in the bushes and held my breath. The racing beat of my heart pulsated through my entire body. I was shaking, and when I saw the thing coming out of the tunnel, I wanted to scream, but I kept silent. A huge arm appeared from the opening of the tunnel and grabbed the ground. It pulled its body forward a few meters, but not enough for it to come outside. Another arm, its left arm, extended out of the tunnel and pulled the body far enough for it to exit the tunnel. It wasn't really a body, though, rather just an enormous gray head with some lonely, long black hairs. It was as big as a truck, and the long arms were attached to where its ears should have been. It had two golden orbs as eyes, and its mouth revealed enormous, sharp teeth. It formed an O with its mouth, going as it sniffed the air with its long nose. It pointed its face towards me, but it didn't seem to see me. I wanted to cry, but forced myself to keep dead silent. Since it didn't have any ears, it probably wouldn't have been able to hear me anyway, but in my state of panic, I didn't think about that. It began spitting something in different directions. One of the things landed just next to me. It was a golden ball, just like the one I had found under the leaves. Seeing my reflection on its surface, I realized they were eyes.
That's why it had come when I found the first ball, and that's why it had found me now. It began to crawl toward my hiding spot, licking its lips while cooing excitedly. I had to run. I closed my eyes for a second and then bolted for the pipe. As soon as I appeared in front of its larger eye, it began to scream like an infant, but much, much louder. I didn't look back, but I could hear it rapidly dragging itself after me. With shaking hands, I grabbed the pipe and began to climb. The screams from the saggy, gray head hurt my ears. When I was just about to climb inside the window, the creature was beneath me. It reached for me with both of its unnaturally long arms. My eyes were burning from the muddy rain that fell into them. I screamed out in pain and terror and blindly pulled myself inside, a fraction of a second before the creature would have grabbed me. Somehow, I don't remember how, the window cracked as I fell down on the granite steps of the staircase. There was a loud bang, and the crying from the monster outside stopped in an instant. I got up, rubbed the rain out of my eyes, and looked outside. The blue tricycle was gone, and so was the slithering beast. My own world had returned outside the window, possibly because it broke. I got into trouble for sneaking out and for breaking the window. I'm not sure if I ever told my mother the story at the time, but if I did, she most likely took it as a way for me to escape my responsibilities. As I said, over time, I stopped believing this story. I blamed my wild imagination. After all, it was the most reasonable explanation. But last week, I visited my mother to go through my old stuff before she gifted it away to charity, and that was when I found it. There was something heavy in one of my old toy boxes. I swallowed nervously. A drip of sweat ran down the side of my head, and I opened the box with trembling hands. It was the golden ball that I had found that day. I saw my reflection on its shiny surface. It instantly felt as if someone or something was watching me from far, far away. Or maybe just from the other side of a window. If you walk through a certain run-down inner-city area located in a working-class northern town, there's a chance you'll stumble across a terraced street like none other. I say there's a chance, but in reality, it's a slim one. That's because, technically speaking, Purgatory Street does not exist. At least, not in our plane of existence. You won't find it on any maps, and none of the locals will speak about it with outsiders. There are only whispers of its existence in the back rooms of working men's clubs, bingo halls, and greasy spoon cafes. It's taken on a life of its own, however, becoming an urban legend across the towns and cities of the North, with rumors eventually reaching people like me through obscure internet forums. I regard myself as an amateur urban explorer and paranormal investigator. Most of my family and friends say I have too much time on my hands and I'm wasting my life chasing after ghosts and ghouls in abandoned buildings and dark country lanes. And after years of dead ends and disappointments, there were times I thought of giving up my unusual hobby, but then I walked the street and my life changed forever. I would like to say there's some set of rules or magic formula you can follow to visit the street. If there is such a way, nobody's ever been able to identify it. In the real world, the location is wasteland, a gravel-covered empty lot plagued with weeds, rats, and assorted rubbish. It's unclear who owns the land. The council has nothing to do with the site, and no private developer has ever tried to build on it. When you ask the local residents about the land, you'll receive a stony response. It's as if there's a conspiracy amongst the residents to keep this dark secret from the outside world. And they will react with hostility whenever someone like me comes around and starts asking questions. There's no set time and date when you can turn up and the wasteland magically transforms into the paranormal street of legend. Some say that the street chooses you, only allowing a select few to walk its cobblestones. In any case, 999 out of 1,000 times you'll visit the location and find nothing but weeds and piles of dumped rubbish. But despite the numerous disappointments over the years, I kept on returning. I guess there was something pulling me back to that place, and in the end, my persistence was rewarded. But as the old adage goes, you should be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. It was almost midnight on a cold Saturday evening when the street finally opened up to me. I almost didn't go that night, as I was exhausted after working a double shift at my day job, but I still braved the elements and dragged myself out to the site. And when I saw it, my heart almost jumped out of my chest. The strip of wasteland was gone, inexplicably replaced by 2 rows of red brick terraced houses set along a street paved with old-fashioned cobblestones and dimly illuminated by gas lamps. It was as if I was looking back in time, casting my eyes upon a working-class street of the industrial era. But this wasn't what concerned me the most. The entrance to the street appeared as a transparent, liquid-like portal, a doorway to another dimension or plane of existence. I stood there in astonishment for some time, barely believing my eyes as I realized I was looking upon another world. I was briefly distracted by a sound, so I turned around, looking across the real street where I stood and seeing a young couple staggering along the pavement, presumably returning home after a night out. They looked at me suspiciously, whispering and snickering at each other as they passed. I realized that they couldn't see what I could. Otherwise, they would have reacted very differently. This vision was only meant for me. I waited until the drunken couple had disappeared from sight before turning back towards the mysterious street. For a moment, I was unsure how to proceed. The accounts I read from the few who'd claimed to have visited Purgatory Street were typically vague, and so I wasn't clear on how one would enter and exit the supernatural realm. The membrane, or whatever it was, looked inviting, but appearances can be deceptive, and I didn't know whether I could safely cross over and make it back again. Part of me felt like turning around and leaving. I had seen that Purgatory Street did exist after all, and perhaps this was enough. But no, I'd come this far, and I knew I couldn't give up now, so I took a deep breath and stepped forward, cautiously lifting my arm and putting my hand through the membrane, watching in astonishment as the surface rippled like a pond of water broken by a dropped pebble. I saw my hand on the other side, relieved that it was still connected to my body. Reassured, I continued to walk, submerging my entire form in the liquid membrane. For a second, I couldn't breathe, and so I feared the worst, but then I emerged on the other side, stepping out onto the cobblestones of Purgatory Street. Relieved, I breathed the air, sensing that it was somehow different to my world, but not really understanding why. Still, it was a case of so far so good. But now I had crossed over, and I needed to make sure I could make it back. Without turning around, I took a step backwards, and then another, once again passing through the portal before finding myself back on the real street in the mortal realm. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to return, but thankfully this wasn't the case, as I could step across and back without any problem. And so, after all these years of trying, I had finally discovered something extraordinary. I was very excited, but also nervous, not knowing what lay before me or how long the portal would stay open. But I was determined to explore the street and uncover its secrets. And so I moved on without delay. And this is what I saw. The street itself is like a throwback to a bygone era. It's difficult to place it precisely in the historical context, as there are a number of anachronisms. What you do see when you first step foot onto the road is rows of 2 up, 2 down terraced houses on either side of the street, their front doors opening right out onto the pavement. The lamps lighting up the road appear to be gas rather than electric, although I have no idea who maintains them. In addition to the houses are 2 establishments of note, a corner shop and a backstreet pub, the types of small businesses that are sadly disappearing in the modern world. At first glance, the street has a quaint and almost idyllic appearance, but as you've probably already guessed, this small community holds many dark secrets. As I've already explained, the top of the street is a portal leading back to our world. The other end, however, well, that was something of a mystery. When I looked down the road, I saw a thick mist beginning just after the last set of gas lamps. It formed a thick membrane that I couldn't see through, and it was disconcerting to think about what lay on the other side of the fog. but this was a problem for later. I walked cautiously down the dimly lit street, feeling increasingly uneasy as I progressed. I had the feeling that I was being watched by hostile eyes, and when I looked to the windows of the houses, I swore I could see dark outlines of shadowy figures standing just behind the curtains. I jumped when I saw a set of curtains twitch and a face emerge from the darkness, a ghostly white, almost inhuman face with black, shark-like eyes staring at me. I recoiled in horror, but couldn't look away. It was as if those devilish eyes were holding me in a trance, and against every instinct in my body, I found myself slowly walking towards the window, listening intently as the creature whispered softly through the glass. It repeated the same line over and over, its red lips emitting a low, unnatural voice.
You don't belong here. You don't belong here. You do not belong here.
It screamed so loudly the third time that I fell backwards onto the cobbles, landing heavily as the creature cackled cruelly at my misfortune. I glanced at the portal entrance and for a moment considered fleeing back to my own world, but I didn't. In the tales I'd heard and read, paranormal realms such as these were often protected by a harbinger, a supernatural entity tasked with scaring off visitors from the mortal world. They would go out of their way to frighten the likes of me, but the stories say that they can't do us any harm. I hoped the accounts were correct and summoned the courage to stand up and face the beast.
Leave this place.
No, I replied defiantly. Not until I'm finished. It reacted with anger, its eyes widening and fangs exposed as it hissed like an angry cat. For a moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake as I imagined the beast smashing through the thin glass and devouring me right there on the cobbles. But instead, the creature retreated, snarling once again before it disappeared behind the worn curtains. I breathed a sigh of relief as I turned back to the streets, reacting with surprise when I saw two figures standing on the pavement watching me closely. They were two elderly ladies dressed in heavy winter coats and with shawls covering their heads. Their hair was white and their skin wrinkled, but the ladies had eyes filled with expression and intelligence. I noted how both carried wicker shopping baskets covered with kitchen towels, and they stood on the pavement outside the doorway of number 7.
Good for you, son.
Called out the woman on the right.
Good on you for standing up to that vile thing. It's high time he got taken down a peg or two.
I soon realized she was talking about my encounter with the entity in number 3, and wondered what she knew about it, but part of me was afraid to ask. Thanks, I muttered as I cautiously walked across the cobbles toward them. Both women seemed friendly enough, greeting me with smiles and waves. However, this was far from a normal situation, and I suspected the old ladies were not what they appeared to be. Nevertheless, I had embarked on this quest knowing the risks, and had a feeling these women could provide me with some answers.
I'm Mavis, and this is Alice. Nice to meet you, young man.
I nodded my head and smiled thinly. Good to meet you both. Do you live on the street? I inquired. Mavis laughed before replying.
Oh, yes, young man. We've lived on this street for a long, long time. Not much happens around here without us hearing about it.
I nodded my head in understanding. Mavis and Alice reminded me of the neighborhood gossips, the types who would always be standing on the street corner and watching all the comings and goings.
You're not from around here, son, are you?
Asked Alice, even though she surely already knew the answer to her question. No, I replied hesitantly. I'm from back there. I pointed towards the portal at the top of the street, wondering if they could see what I saw. Alice nodded her head in apparent understanding.
Ah, you're from the other side. It's been a long time since we've had anyone visit from over there.
I expected follow-up questions, but instead, Mavis and Alice shared a look, and I saw a terrible sadness in their eyes.